It's the spring of 2003 in the sleepy North Carolina suburb of Clayton.
Clayton is the kind of place where people go to retire, when they're looking for that small town, slower pace of life kind of community.
Paul Berkeley and his family have just relocated to the area from California.
Paul was a computer programmer by trade and had gotten a job in North Carolina and decided to move his family to Clayton because it's such a nice place.
Paul Berkeley was slim, carried himself well, very enthusiastic, witty, always willing to help other people, always dressed nicely, clean-cut young man, just a great guy.
46-year-old Paul met 26-year-old Monique 3 years ago, and the couple quickly married despite the 20-year age gap.
Opposites attract. Paul is older, he's more mature, more responsible, and maybe already has a lifestyle that Monique wants for herself, but at her age hasn't been able to achieve quite yet.
The appeal of the striking brunette is there for all to see.
Monique was pretty. She was a very attractive young lady.
She was a fun-loving person. She seemed to be someone who liked to have a lifestyle that was maybe a little more interesting, perhaps, than what Clayton may have had to offer.
Paul has 2 teenage kids from a previous marriage, but despite only being a few years older than her stepchildren, Monique has made sure that they all feel like a family.
Monique took an immediate liking to his children, which I'm sure Paul found very attractive.
Family life is falling happily into place for Paul and Monique. And life behind the closed doors of their new home is just as rosy.
Monique and Paul seemed to be a normal, happy couple when they first moved to North Carolina. I'm sure it was all still sort of fresh and new to them, and that's always a time when relationships bloom.
Their passion in the bedroom is very real. What Paul was finding with Monique was almost a fountain of youth. By being with a younger woman, he felt vital and appreciated and younger than his real age. And Monique definitely responded to Paul.
But Paul's loyalty to his country is about to bring his marital bliss to a screeching halt. Having served in the military as a young man, Paul is still active in the Naval Reserves. Towards the end of 2004, Paul gets a letter in the mail. It's a moment he's been mentally preparing for the past 3 years.
Paul was called to the Middle East, to Bahrain, to active duty.
Paul embraces this call to serve, not knowing it's destined to come at a very steep price.
Paul was proud to serve the country. He made reference to the sense of responsibility, a sense of honor in doing something like that for the country. I'm sure like anyone who's serving overseas, there's the joy of serving the country and taking on such a huge responsibility, but also knowing that at the same time you're sacrificing that time with your family, in Paul's case with his wife and his children.
When Monique and the kids find out, they're shocked and worried.
The kids, like any kids, were very upset about the prospect of their dad being away for so long. But Paul had the utmost faith and confidence that Monique was going to be taking very good care of his children.
In January 2005, Paul says goodbye to Monique. He could be away for up to 2 years. She's terrified at the impact his departure will have on the family and how she'll handle the responsibilities and pressures in his absence.
Gonna be okay?
I feel like we were just starting our life together and now you have to leave.
He played a strong role in the family as the provider and the decision maker. And so I think Monique in particular was nervous about him being gone. She was very afraid. She had not been on her own. She had to do things on her own and take care of the children.
Little does Paul know that the pledge he gave his country will undermine the vows he made to his wife.
When Monique married Paul in her early 20s, she had never really had an identity unto herself. She defined herself now through her marriage, her relationship with Paul, and when he's dispatched to the Middle East, she's adrift.
By March 2005, over a month has passed since Paul's deployment, and there's been a noticeable change in the Berkeley home. With the head of the household gone, the routines and discipline he demanded have disappeared.
Monique is a great stepmother to Paul's teenagers, but she's very close in age to them, so she takes on the role perhaps of the older sister or the fun babysitter.
The general atmosphere at the Berkeley house was a place where there weren't a whole lot of rules. It was a place where the teenagers could come and pretty much do what they wanted.
At first, Monique is overwhelmed, but driven by feelings of loneliness since her husband's departure, she makes a fateful decision and joins in the teenage fun.
Yeah, you want a beer?
Join us.
Maybe she felt there was no one her own age, where she could find this kind of outlet, that for the life she was looking for, it had to be found with high school students.
By following the lead of her own stepchildren and their friends, Monique tries to recapture her own carefree youth.
She's left in a situation where she has a chance to kind of remake herself and decide who she's going to be, and she turns to this group of teenagers.
For whatever reason, for Monique, these teenagers, these people in high school, were friends, were peers, were people with whom she could and should socialize.
Soon the word spreads around town that the Berkeley home is the place to be. And as destiny would have it, the news reaches a teenager named Andrew Canty.
What's up, man?
Oh, man, what's going on?
Andrew is an 18-year-old young man.
He looked very adult, I thought. When you usually see 18-year-olds, they have that young, growing person look on them, but I thought he looked very manly at that age.
Andrew comes from a very different background from Monique and her stepchildren.
I don't know that he was a particularly good student. I think he had dropped out, although I think he was intelligent, but I don't think he was very focused on being a student.
And his bad boy reputation has made things difficult for him at home.
Andrew Canty had moved to North Carolina from New York a few years before, and there had been increasing tension between he and his mother during that time. As things became uncomfortable at his own home, or he didn't like the rules that were being imposed there, he began to spend more and more time at the Berkeley house.
For this teenage rebel, the anything goes policy at the Berkeley home is a dream come true. And it certainly doesn't hurt that the lady of the house is the young and attractive Monique, who finds herself drawn to the troubled drifter.
I think for Monique, this was someone very different from her husband. Andrew Canty was young. He was African American. He represented basically a different lifestyle than what she had been living.
Where you never heard my name.
That was an attraction for her as she sought to make her life over.
Andrew.
For Andrew, the idea of anything happening with a lonely housewife is the stuff of teen fantasy. Little does he know, it's about to become a reality. Monique knows all about Andrew's rocky home situation with his mother, and so, in April 2005, she offers him a thrilling and dangerous alternative.
Andrew was coming around to the point that finally Monique invited him to actually move in with her and the kids.
But Monique isn't just giving him a place to crash. It soon becomes obvious she's offering him a whole lot more.
I would imagine that given that Monique and Andrew spent so much time together, that it's one of those things that evolved.
Later that spring, Monique leads Andrew upstairs. Up until today, they've only flirted. Now, Monique is ready to do more than talk. In the house she shares with her husband and two stepchildren, Monique draws Andrew in for a first passionate kiss.
Her attraction for this young man truly catches them both by surprise. It's chemistry. She can't deny it. She wasn't looking for it, but it's instant, it's hard-hitting, like a brick in the face.
This is forbidden in any way you look at it. Monique is married. That's huge. This child is so much younger than she is. They shouldn't even be in the same social circle. All kinds of red flags surrounded this relationship. There was nowhere healthy for this relationship to go.
It's a kiss that will spark a blazing passion.
Forbidden love is always more fun.
And take them to a violent place of no return. Monique Berkeley's husband, Paul, is overseas serving his country as a naval reservist. But the 26-year-old housewife isn't sitting around missing her man and waiting for his return. Instead, she's developed a dangerous attraction to 18-year-old Andrew Canty. By the summer of 2005, Andrew is comfortably living in the Berkeley home. At this point, all he and Monique have done is kiss, but he's obsessed with a sexy older woman.
Even though Monique is about 8 years older than Andrew, he kind of likes the idea of falling in love with an older woman, and probably enjoys the idea that he could be the knight in shining armor that Monique falls in love with next.
But there's at least one fly in the ointment. Word has gotten back to Andrew's mom, and she strongly disapproves of him moving in with Monique.
From what I understand, Andrew had told her, I'm an adult, I'm going to do what I want, and for whatever reason, Andrew's mother couldn't stop it, couldn't get in the way of this.
And she's about to be given even greater cause for concern. One day that summer, Monique leads Andrew into the bedroom she normally shares with her husband, Paul, to have sex with her young lover for the first time.
At some point, it crossed the line from friendship to something more. There were already boundaries crossed anyway, so it would be easier to make that transition from, hey, you're my friend's stepmother, to, hey, now we're in a relationship together, even though you're married.
And Andrew's not the only one who's crossed the line into uncharted territory.
Monique is experiencing physical, sexual, emotional, psychological gratification like she's never experienced it before in her life. And this makes her engage in very high-risk behaviors. She's not thinking at all. She's just feeling.
For the lonely housewife and the teenage boy, it's a white-hot fantasy come to life.
She's a married woman making love to him in her husband's home. That really had to give them an adrenaline rush, something they had never experienced before. Forbidden love is always more fun.
Hey, honey.
Hi.
Halfway around the world, Monique's husband, Paul, is completely unaware of the young man now living in his house and sleeping with his wife.
The whole time Petty Officer Berkeley was together with me in Bahrain, he was never down. He was always enthusiastic. I never detected any sort of change in his demeanor, never detected any change in his conversations. He sounded like everything was fine.
Confident that her husband is in the dark about what's going on, throughout the fall of 2005, Monique gets bolder and starts taking even bigger risks.
I think the relationship between Monique and Andrew was sort of an open secret. Her stepdaughter knew about it, and people in the neighborhood knew as well that some teenager was living in the home.
Monique is playing a very high-stakes game, and it's about to come crashing down around her. At the beginning of December 2005, Monique gets a surprise web call from her husband.
I have some great news to tell you.
What?
I'm coming home for Christmas.
He's been given leave to visit his family.
I think Paul was very ecstatic to find out he would be returning to the United States. He's excited, looking forward to spending the holidays with his family.
Paul Berkeley will be back in North Carolina in 15 days' time. He's been gone for a year, and he has no idea how much things have changed in his home.
Monique knew what Paul would be walking into when he came home. I'm sure from her perspective, that was a moment of panic, because she has to figure out, what do I do now?
In the 12 months Paul has been away, Monique hasn't just been sleeping with Andrew. She's deeply involved emotionally.
She had really fallen in love with him.
Now she finds herself in an impossible position. She has two men in her life, and both believe they're in a committed relationship with her. As the clock ticks down on Paul's homecoming, Monique and Andrew struggle with their feelings.
Before Paul actually arrives back home for the holidays in December of 2005, there is a discussion between Monique Berkeley and Andrew Canty about what they're going to do.
Paul's homecoming really puts their backs against the wall. They have to make decisions, but what this really does is ignite their passion even further.
Monique and Andrew are whipping up a cauldron of sex and lies, and it's about to reach a boiling point. Monique's not ready to stop seeing Andrew, but isn't willing to tell Paul about him. She asks Paul's kids, Becky and Zeke, for help.
They were close to Monique and they wanted her to be happy, but they knew that this was a situation that was not going to turn out well.
I just know that I don't want your dad to know about
She
it.
begs them to promise not to tell their father anything.
They know the ramifications of this information getting out, what it's going to do to her dad and what it's going to do to the family.
And despite their flesh and blood connection, Paul's children come to an unexpected decision.
Becky and Zeke see Andrew and Monique as part of their peer group, that classic teenage loyalty of never rat anyone out. It's a cultural understanding that you don't tell on your friends. That trumps the loyalty that Becky and Zeke may have felt.
They agreed to keep it a secret.
On December 14th, 2005, Monique Berkeley goes to the airport to pick up her husband, whom she hasn't seen in almost a year.
By all accounts, Paul was terribly excited about the prospect of returning home. Even though it was going to be a short visit, he'd been speaking with Monique, speaking with the children. Everybody seemed excited, as anybody would be returning from overseas.
But what Paul doesn't know is that at that very moment, there's another man in his house.
Andrew was in a hurry to get all of his belongings out of the house before Paul had a chance to get from the airport home. And interestingly enough, he was doing it the day that Paul was flying into Raleigh-Durham Airport.
Andrew makes it out just in time, and Paul arrives home unaware of all that has happened since he's been gone. At first, it's a happy holiday reunion for the Berkeleys.
Paul's homecoming is a cause for genuine celebration in the family. When he steps off that plane and his children embrace him, no doubt Monique feels a real tug at her heartstrings. Monique is undoubtedly conflicted. She's in love with Andrew, but now she's remembering Paul, the husband that she loved who went away to serve his country.
She was happy, the children were happy to see their father come back home, as any family would be.
But that happiness is short-lived. Later that day, Paul and Monique are going about their domestic routines when they get a visitor. The young man standing at the front door is here to see Monique, and the Berkeleys' brief spell of domestic peace is about to be shattered forever. Monique Berkeley has been cheating on her husband, Paul, with a teenage boy named Andrew Canty. Now, Navy reservist Paul is back, and Monique's secret life is on the verge of exposure. When Andrew drops in on the Berkeleys out of the blue, Paul senses something isn't right.
He noticed chemistry between Andrew and Monique. I'm sure there was something there that was visible. Monique and Andrew couldn't pretend that they were strangers. There's a level of comfort there that had to be visible to anyone who saw them together.
Is any good on the film?
The teen's unexpected visit is confusing for Paul, but it's so bold, he doesn't put two and two together.
People having affairs very often will test the waters and try to defy logic. It's called a contraindicator. They do the exact opposite of what somebody would expect to try to prove them wrong. Andrew showing up at Paul's house defies logic.
But the seeds of doubt have been planted in Paul's mind, and they're about to be given good reason to flourish. The next day, the mood in the Berkeley house darkens even further when Monique returns home after a day out with Andrew.
Monique had gone to a funeral for someone that was close to Andrew, and Paul was upset about that.
What's wrong?
I don't know. I feel like something's different.
Paul can't comprehend why his wife would want to spend time with a friend of his kids.
This Andrew boy, what's he doing here all the time?
Andrew is a friend of your son's, and he's come over once.
He had limited time at home, and here she was going off to this function with Andrew.
That was a source of some annoyment and concern for Paul, and probably heightened the suspicions.
Monique reassures Paul he has nothing to worry about. She and Andrew are only friends. But Paul's mind races to conclusions about what may be happening behind his back.
I believe that he had some insight that something may have taken place between Monique and Andrew. I don't think he had gotten those feelings confirmed or his suspicions confirmed, but it was something that he was concerned about.
Well, I hope that what you're telling me right now is the truth, okay?
He can't really even understand the emotions that are boiling up inside of him because this is unthinkable. He finds himself extremely angry.
Where are you going? Come on.
Upstairs.
Are we gonna even talk about this?
He really wonders what's going on in her life, but when he confronts her, she's got an answer for everything.
Monique's stone-faced denial makes Paul question whether he has misread the situation and overreacted.
Returning from a very long deployment, there is some tension and some distance. So if you told me that there was 2 or 3 days of distance or iciness, it wouldn't strike me as being completely unusual.
Paul was cognizant of the fact that it might take Monique some time to get used to him being back in the home.
And Paul isn't the only one struggling to adjust to being back. Now that the Navy reservist is home, Andrew is once again living with his mom. And it's an unpleasant change from life with his lover.
For Andrew, I think that Monique, in some respects, provided a safe haven.
Unable to see Monique, Andrew turns to his best friend, LaTuan.
LaTuan Johnson was the boyfriend of Monique's stepdaughter, also a teenager at the same high school.
LaTuan had brought Andrew to the parties at the Berkeley house, and he knows all about his friend's relationship with the older woman.
Andrew, he's really pondering what's going on while I'm away from the Berkeley household. Is Monique back in that matrimonial bed? Is she going to reunite with her husband and toss me away? Is this just a fling to her? This insecurity can make him very unstable.
Back at the Berkeley house, it seems like Andrew's fears aren't far off base. On December 17th, 2005, Monique pulls a 180 and offers her husband an olive branch.
Monique had been somewhat distant. He was glad to see that she was coming around.
She proposes a romantic plan to get things back on track.
How you doing?
Good. She wants to take a date with him and go to a movie, and even suggests they get a picnic and go to the park afterwards, maybe for a midnight tryst.
What do you want to say?
I believe that Petty Officer Berkeley would have been very enthusiastic about Monique planning the date. To me, that would seem to indicate a desire to return to the pre-deployment normal intimacy, and that he would look forward to that.
There's the wife he's been missing. There's the young, hot woman who really is in love with him.
Paul happily agrees to the date.
From Paul's perspective, he may have hoped that night would signal a turning point in their relationship, perhaps get them back on track.
But does Paul know more than he's letting on? And is he really prepared to forgive and forget? That evening, after watching a movie, Monique and Paul Berkeley stroll into the park for a moonlight picnic.
Monique prepared a basket that contained candy and candles and wine.
They are the picture of a couple in love.
I think we should buy a boat.
Oh.
Yeah, so I can take it out and take it on the water.
Until a split second of violence destroys their love forever.
I've been shot.
Monique Berkeley is locked in an illicit affair with one of her stepchildren's friends, Andrew. But just as her husband, Paul, is about to discover what's been going on behind his back, tragedy strikes.
I've been shot.
Police respond to the panicked emergency call, but have a hard time locating the wounded caller.
They ask her to yell out so that they can determine where she's located.
Are you in the back of the park, in the front of the park? Where exactly are you? In the back. Yeah, just as loud as you can. Okay.
When the police get to her, they see that there are two people that have been wounded as a result of a gunshot.
And they discovered Monique and Paul. Monique had been shot in the left shoulder. Paul had been shot in the head. We'd later find out that he'd also been stabbed.
There's a large pool of dark red blood around Paul's body, but he's still breathing.
He's teetering on death's door, and pretty graphic, bad situation.
Monique is also bleeding heavily from the wound in her shoulder. According to her, the couple had been ambushed by two men.
Monique gave some brief information about what had happened, that she had heard some voices. She believed that it was two individuals and that Paul had been shot, and then she had quickly been shot thereafter.
Police can find no sign of the assailants.
To the police, it looks like random robbery. Someone sees a couple at night, it's dark, they're in a secluded area, let's attack.
Come with me, man. Okay. Come with me. Stand up, please. Take it easy.
The couple is rushed to the hospital, where, hours later, Paul dies. With his death, the park attack officially becomes a murder investigation.
At that point, my team, the homicide team, was contacted and we responded to initiate the follow-up investigation.
At first glance, the evidence at the scene supports Monique's story that their romantic evening was hijacked by violence.
There is a basket of items which include condoms and candy and candles, champagne that has fallen on the ground and the contents spilled out.
But the picnic scenario seems increasingly suspicious to investigators.
The one thing, though, that concerned us was actually the weather. I mean, it was extremely cold outside, and we began very quickly talking about how odd it was for a couple to come to a park like that when the weather conditions were the way they were.
Detectives want to find out why Paul and Monique were in the park so late at night. The next morning, they decide to pay Paul's grieving widow a visit in the hospital, where she is recovering from her gunshot wound.
Monique's initial story to the police at the hospital was that she and her husband had gone to see this movie and then had gone to the park for a romantic encounter.
The cops ask Monique if anyone else knew she and Paul were planning to be in the park that evening. Monique admits there is one person who is aware of her plans, and he had good reason to be unhappy about them.
During the interview, as we were gathering background information on Monique and on Paul,
We had a relationship.
Monique admitted to us that she had been involved in an affair
Monique there at the hospital relates that she's having an affair with Andrew Canty.
Monique says the affair is nothing serious, but it seems like she's holding back.
She indicated that she wanted to tell me more information, but needed some additional time to think about it. So we decided at that point to give her some time, and we left the hospital to return to the police station so that we could continue with the investigation.
The detectives immediately start digging for information on Andrew.
They were looking at the pattern of phone calls back and forth from Monique to Andrew and suspected that there was something there more than just a casual relationship, given the timing of some of those calls.
But cops are stunned by how serious the illicit relationship had become.
As we began gathering additional background information, we learned that Andrew Canty had been living with her and her family.
This information cast doubt over Monique's claim that it was just a casual fling and reveals a potential love triangle, which would give Andrew a strong motive for wanting the lover who jilted him and her husband dead.
It rose to the top of the list in terms of suspects.
On the afternoon of Sunday, December 18th, 2005, investigators bring Andrew Canty down to the police station to answer questions about his affair with Monique.
He was confirming some of the information that Monique had told us about their relationship.
But he denies any involvement in Paul's murder, and he claims he can prove it.
When the police initially questioned Andrew, he seemed confident he had an alibi for where he was.
Andrew says that on the night of the murder, he was over 80 miles away in Greenville with his best friend, LaTuan.
LaTuan Johnson worked at Walmart. Andrew Canty had come and picked him up. They went into the Walmart, bought a drink, spoke with some employees there, and then left.
The whole exchange is recorded on the store's cameras, giving Andrew an alibi. Police look into the background of Andrew's friend LaTuan. On closer inspection, he doesn't seem a likely person to be mixed up in something like this.
LaTuan Johnson was a good student. He was in ROTC in high school and went off to college at East Carolina University and held down a part-time job.
He denies being involved, but as police are questioning him, incriminating new information comes to light. A detailed tracking analysis of the boys' cell phone records reveals that they weren't in Greenville for the whole evening like they claimed in their alibi.
The young men had obviously concocted a story. They had tried to establish an alibi in North Carolina. They purposely went there so that they could get on videotape, knowing that we would review it. But we were able to pretty quickly refute their alibi.
Key phone calls put the boys in Raleigh right before the murder took place.
We actually learned that while Monique and Paul were in the movie theater, the young men were close by as well.
Faced with this new evidence, LaTuan quickly changes his story.
LaTuan almost immediately asked for an attorney.
Now, he's ready to talk, and he'll finally reveal what really happened that deadly night in the park. Paul Berkeley has been murdered, and his wife's lover, Andrew, stands accused. Andrew admits to the affair, but not the crime. And with no proof, police can't be certain he's guilty. Now, Andrew's friend, LaTuan, is ready to spill the beans about the attack on Paul and Monique Berkeley. LaTuan tells police that he and Andrew attacked the Berkeleys in the park, but he wants to make it clear that he didn't pull the trigger.
He talked much more than Andrew did. He was more forthcoming about it, and he was anxious. He was not saddled with being the shooter.
Ultimately, we were able to conduct follow-up interviews, and LaTuan Johnson indicated to us at that point that Andrew had carried out the actual shooting.
Police take LaTuan's damning allegation back to Andrew. Andrew tries to explain his presence near the park, but in doing so, only incriminates himself.
Andrew made some statements, and although he never outright confessed to the crime, some of his statements were very suspicious in nature.
When he answers investigators' questions, Andrew includes details that only someone who was at the crime scene would know. Combined with Latoine's claim, plus the cell phone records, police decide they have enough evidence to make their move.
We had developed sufficient probable cause to make an arrest. We did charge both young men with murder, and this is happening almost simultaneously.
Detectives share the news of Andrew and Latoine's arrest with Monique.
We make the decision to return back out to the hospital to continue our conversation with Monique.
Last time cops were there, they felt like she had something more she wanted to say. And now, after hearing about Andrew, in a bid to explain away the situation, she decides it's time to speak. What she says will blow up everything the cops know so far about this twisted case.
We found out that Paul had $400,000 in life insurance through a government life insurance policy. She admitted to engaging in a plot with both Andrew and Latoine to kill Paul at the park so that they could cash in his policy.
But Monique says she never really wanted Paul dead, and it was Andrew who was the driving force.
She did try to mitigate her situation by saying that she had changed her mind shortly before the plot was to be carried out. But that couldn't be the case because she could have easily opted to bypass the park that night. But she did.
In an effort to incriminate Andrew, Monique goes on to reveal every sordid detail of the murder plot.
Before Paul actually arrives back home for the holidays in December of 2005, there is a discussion between Monique Berkeley and Andrew Canty about killing Paul Berkeley.
Maybe we can make it so that Paul's not a problem anymore.
Monique says that when Andrew hears about Paul's life insurance policy, he realizes they really could have a future together. The idea of murder becomes irresistible.
Monique in her mid-20s and Andrew at 18, they didn't have careers. They really had no means of making it on their own. Monique couldn't make it without Paul. Andrew couldn't make it without Monique. That $400,000 life insurance policy was going to be the glue that could hold them together. The truth is, she never would have killed Paul without that affair. But that affair was more than Andrew. It was about her experiencing something that she never had felt in her life. It clouded her logic, and at the time she decided to conspire to kill Paul, she just was thinking, I want to feel this way forever.
According to Monique, Andrew turned to his best friend Latoine for help, and together, the three of them figured out a plan.
Monique had planned an entire romantic evening for Paul that included a movie. Following the movie, they were going to go to a local park.
Monique lures Paul in with promises of rekindling their romance. And despite the cold weather that night, Paul agrees.
Paul didn't have any idea, obviously, that this would be the last moment on Earth. I think Paul, while he was probably concerned about the weather, he was more concerned about making Monique happy and making sure that her plans for a nice evening together came to fruition.
And at that moment, Paul's fate is sealed.
They start making their way through the park to the prearranged area where Monique and Andrew had agreed that this would take place.
Monique says she and Paul are the only ones around, but that's not the case for long.
Once they get to this area, Andrew comes out behind Paul and shoots Paul. Paul falls, wounded in the head.
There's still one crucial thing that needs to be done to sell their story to the police.
Seconds later, Andrew shoots Monique, and Andrew and Latoine then flew.
All that's left for Monique to do is raise the alarm.
You've been shot
Monique's damning confession is the final evidence the cops need. And on September 26, 2007, she appears in court on charges she murdered her husband. The prosecution's case is that once Monique tasted a life with Andrew, going back to Paul wasn't an option, and neither was a divorce.
Monique Berkeley was very concerned that if she were to divorce Paul, that she would not ever get to see the children again.
I think she saw her husband as an obstacle to the relationship and the lifestyle that she wanted to have.
And Andrew is happy to go along with whatever Monique wants.
I think for Andrew, the motive may have been the money, immaturity, and being with Monique for as long as that was going to last.
But what prosecutors can't fathom is why LaTuan got involved.
That's a curious one. He had so much going for him that he didn't have to walk down this path. I don't know whether it was peer pressure. I don't know whether if it was the thought of all the money, but something made him say yes.
Faced with the death penalty, Monique accepts a deal to plead guilty and gets a life sentence.
Paul Berkeley's murder is horrific because it's so unnecessary. It is a case where had they gone the route of divorce, Becky and Zeke would have their father, that Paul's family would have their brother. It's horrific because it's senseless.
Paul should be remembered as a great man, a good family man, a fine father. He was a great sailor and a good American.
Imagine the vast, seemingly endless expanse of a South Pacific Ocean. It is a world defined by its deep, unfathomable blues, where water stretches out to touch the horizon in every direction, creating a profound sense of isolation from the rest of the bustling globe. In the heart of this immense aquatic landscape lies American Samoa, a small, lush archipelago renowned for its breathtaking volcanic peaks, dense tropical rainforests, and a deeply rooted culture that prioritizes community, family, and peace. For generations, the capital city of Pago Pago, nestled within one of the deepest and most naturally protected harbors in the world, has stood as a quiet sanctuary. It has always been a place where time seems to slow down, where the frantic pace of modern continental life is replaced by the rhythmic crashing of ocean waves and the gentle rustling of palm leaves. To the outside observer, American Samoa is the quintessential island paradise, an idyllic postcard of tranquility far removed from the dark, violent underbellies of major global cities. But between the years of 2018 and 2020, this illusion of an untouched sanctuary was brutally and systematically shattered. The island did not fall victim to a natural disaster or a military invasion, but rather to an invisible, creeping darkness that infiltrated its shores through the most mundane of channels. This is the story of how one of the most peaceful territories on Earth was transformed into a vital, blood-soaked artery for transnational organized crime, and how the deep, silent waters surrounding the island became a graveyard for its own youth. To understand the tragedy that unfolded in American Samoa, one must first understand the cold, calculated logic of international drug syndicates. These networks do not view geography through the lens of beauty or culture. They view it purely through the lens of logistics, risk, and profit margin. In the eyes of these criminal enterprises, American Samoa was not a peaceful island community, but rather a golden coordinate on the map of global narcotics trafficking. The island occupies a highly strategic, yet intensely vulnerable, position in the South Pacific Ocean, sitting almost exactly halfway between the western coast of the United States and the lucrative, high-demand markets of Australia and New Zealand. This geographical placement alone made it an attractive waypoint, but it was the unique political and legal status of American Samoa that transformed it into an irresistible target. As an unincorporated, unorganized territory of the United States, American Samoa exists in a complex jurisdictional twilight zone. Goods flowing into the island from the mainland United States, particularly from states with massive ports like California and Hawaii, are technically considered domestic shipments. Because these shipments originate from within the United States, they are inherently subjected to significantly more relaxed customs inspections and regulatory scrutiny compared to international cargo arriving from foreign nations. This legal loophole provided a massive, unguarded backdoor for those who knew how to exploit it. The economic driving force behind this exploitation was methamphetamine, a highly addictive, destructive synthetic stimulant that has ravaged communities across the globe. The financial mathematics of the methamphetamine trade between North America and the South Pacific are staggering, creating an overwhelming incentive for ruthless individuals. Within the United States, due to massive production and supply, the wholesale price of methamphetamine is relatively low. However, once that same exact product crosses the Pacific Ocean and reaches the shores of Australia, New Zealand, or the surrounding Pacific Island nations, its street value skyrockets exponentially. A single kilogram of pure methamphetamine procured cheaply in California can see its value multiply by 10 to 20 times once it reaches the South Pacific market. This extraordinary profit margin, driven by high demand and extreme geographical isolation, meant that syndicates could afford to lose multiple shipments and still make hundreds of millions of dollars in untraceable cash. The financial temptation was simply too vast for international cartels to ignore, and American Samoa, with its relaxed domestic shipping lanes from the U.S. mainland, was chosen as the perfect, unsuspecting transit hub to bridge the gap between cheap supply and wildly lucrative demand. The method by which these syndicates infiltrated the island was not characterized by dramatic, clandestine operations. There were no midnight drops from unregistered aircraft, nor were there stealth submarines navigating the coral reefs. Instead, the criminals hid their poison in plain sight, weaponizing the island's reliance on imported goods and the deeply ingrained cultural tradition of sending care packages. Because American Samoa is geographically isolated, its residents rely heavily on the continuous flow of commercial logistics and personal shipments from relatives living in the mainland United States. The criminal networks utilize this exact, legitimate logistical infrastructure to execute their smuggling operations. High-grade, pure methamphetamine was meticulously and ingeniously concealed within everyday, ordinary items. Authorities would later discover massive quantities of the drug hidden deep inside bulk shipments of basic necessities, seamlessly integrated into pallets of canned food, carefully packed alongside replacement motorcycle parts, or disguised within innocent-looking gift boxes intended for local families. The port of Pago Pago, the economic lifeline of the territory, found itself completely outmatched by the sheer volume and sophistication of the smuggling operation. Every single day, the port receives a massive influx of shipping containers required to sustain the island's population. During the height of the infiltration between 2018 and 2020, the local customs and border protection infrastructure was severely under-equipped to handle the specialized nature of modern drug concealment. The port suffered from a critical lack of advanced, heavy-duty X-ray scanning equipment capable of penetrating large commercial containers or densely packed pallets to identify organic anomalies like methamphetamine. The transnational syndicates were acutely aware of this technological blind spot. They deliberately exploited the overwhelming volume of daily cargo and the lack of specialized detection machinery to push tens of kilograms of pure methamphetamine through the port's gates. In many instances, the operation was further smoothed by internal corruption, with syndicates successfully compromising elements within the logistical chain to ensure their illicit cargo bypassed whatever minimal screening protocols were in place. The drug flowed into Pago Pago not as a trickle, but as a steady, undetected river of poison, hiding behind the facade of humanitarian relief boxes and commercial trade. As the physical shipments of methamphetamine breached the island's defenses, the sheer volume of illicit money and highly addictive narcotics fundamentally destabilized the societal structure of American Samoa. The traditional community bonds, built on mutual respect and familial ties, began to rapidly erode, replaced by the ruthless, paranoid, and violent laws of the criminal underworld. The influx of drugs necessitated a local distribution network, and with that network came the heavy, suffocating presence of gang culture. However, The violence that accompanied the drug trade in American Samoa was distinctly different from the loud, chaotic cartel warfare frequently seen in places like Mexico or Central America. There were no brazen, daylight shootouts in the streets of Pago Pago, nor were there public displays of violence meant to terrorize the general population. Instead, the horror that gripped the island was characterized by a deeply unsettling, suffocating silence. It was a quiet but brutal form of terror. The syndicates operating the distribution networks enforced an absolute, uncompromising code of silence. Local dealers, distributors, and facilitators who made mistakes, lost shipments, failed to produce expected revenues, or demonstrated even the slightest hint of disloyalty were dealt with swiftly and invisibly. The syndicates implemented a shadow justice system, a ruthless internal purging mechanism designed to eliminate liabilities without drawing the immediate attention of federal authorities or the wider public. The most chilling and tragic manifestation of this silent terror was a series of unexplained disappearances that cast a long, dark shadow over the island between 2018 and 2020. The victims of these disappearances were not hardened, lifelong criminals or high-level cartel bosses. They were, overwhelmingly, local indigenous youth, mostly young men ranging in age from their late teens to their mid-20s. These were individuals who had grown up on the island, intimately familiar with its roads, its jungles, and its waters. Many of them had been initially lured into the periphery of the drug trade by the promise of fast, easy money in an economically restricted environment, taking on low-level, high-risk roles as couriers or shippers moving packages across the island. Others were tragically ensnared by the deeply addictive nature of the product itself, accepting small quantities of methamphetamine to distribute locally in exchange for satisfying their own crippling dependencies. They were the most vulnerable cogs in a massive, uncaring transnational machine, entirely expendable in the eyes of the syndicate leaders who controlled the supply. The pattern of these disappearances was as consistent as it was terrifying. These young men would simply vanish overnight, leaving behind a void of unanswered questions and deeply traumatized families. A mother would wake up to find her son's bed empty. A friend would wait for a companion who would never arrive. In the days following a disappearance, local authorities and desperate search parties might stumble upon eerie, disjointed clues left behind in the island's more isolated regions. A perfectly functioning motorcycle might be found abandoned on the edge of a desolate, rocky beach, the keys still in the ignition. Personal belongings, an article of clothing, or a dropped cell phone might be discovered discarded deep within the dense, unforgiving tropical foliage of the island's mountainous interior. These physical remnants served as chilling markers of a life abruptly interrupted, but the individuals themselves were nowhere to be found. The island, despite its relatively small size, seemed to be swallowing its own children whole, leaving no bodies, no crime scenes, and no witnesses willing to speak. The horrifying truth behind these vanishing youths, which would only be fully uncovered through painstaking subsequent investigations and the terrified whispers of confidential informants, revealed the absolute depravity of the networks operating on the island. These young men had not run away, nor had they succumbed to the natural hazards of the island. They had been systematically and quietly executed. The motivations for these murders were brutally pragmatic. In the high-stakes economy of methamphetamine trafficking, debts are not forgiven. Many of the young victims were killed over drug debts, financial shortfalls resulting from lost, stolen, or consumed product. Others were executed based on nothing more than paranoid suspicion, murdered because syndicate enforcers believed they were acting as informants or snitches, feeding information back to local police or federal agencies. The method of disposal utilized by the killers was deeply calculated to ensure that justice could never be served. Recognizing the severe legal implications of leaving a physical body to be discovered, the syndicates turned to the ultimate silent accomplice, the vast Pacific Ocean. The topography of American Samoa features steep volcanic drops where the land meets the sea, leading to incredibly deep waters just offshore. The perpetrators would take the bodies of the murdered youths out into these deep, isolated waters under the cover of darkness. Weighted down and cast into the abyss, the victims were surrendered to the immense power of the South Pacific. The strong, relentless ocean currents and the sheer depth of the marine trenches acted as a perfect, natural incinerator for the evidence, effectively erasing the physical existence of these young men from the face of the earth. The families of the missing were left in a perpetual state of agonizing limbo, denied even the basic human dignity of laying their loved ones to rest, forever haunted by the silent, rolling waves that concealed the ultimate truth of their children's final moments. This era of vanished youth and unchecked, silent violence represented the absolute nadir of American Samoa's modern history, a period where the island's geographical isolation, once its greatest protector, was twisted into the very instrument of its nightmare. To truly grasp the magnitude of the tragedy that befell American Samoa, it is absolutely essential to understand the unique and profound cultural fabric that has bound this island community together for centuries. The traditional Samoan way of life is an intricate, deeply woven tapestry where the individual is essentially inseparable from the collective whole. This society is built upon an ancient, foundational system of extended family and profound communal responsibility. In this environment, a family is not merely a nuclear unit of parents and children living in isolation, but a vast, interconnected network of aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents, all operating under the guidance and wisdom of village leaders. The concept of community here is not an abstract ideal but a daily, lived reality. People share resources, they share responsibilities, and crucially, they share each other's joys and sorrows. It is a place where doors are rarely locked, where neighbors are treated as blood relatives, and where the village church serves as both the spiritual and social epicenter of existence. This deep, abiding sense of belonging has historically been the island's greatest defense against external hardships. The physical isolation of the territory and the vastness of the South Pacific only serve to strengthen these internal bonds, creating a societal structure where anonymity is virtually impossible. Everyone knows everyone else. Lineages are memorized and respected, and a secret is something almost impossible to keep. It was within this deeply trusting, highly transparent, and tightly knit societal framework that the insidious nature of the methamphetamine crisis proved most devastating. The cartels did not just introduce a chemical substance to the island, they introduced a corrosive force specifically designed to exploit and ultimately dismantle the very foundations of communal trust and familial devotion. The victims of this unprecedented wave of violence were not outsiders, nor were they hardened figures from the criminal underworld. They were the very lifeblood and future of the island. The individuals who began to vanish into the tropical nights between 2018 and 2020 were overwhelmingly young, indigenous Samoan men, typically ranging in age from 18 to 25. Before the shadow of transnational syndicates fell over Pago Pago, these young men lived lives deeply rooted in the traditions of their ancestors and the simple rhythms of island existence. They were the youths who could be seen playing fiercely competitive games of rugby on the village greens as the sun began to set over the volcanic ridges. They were the sons who helped their fathers navigate the intricate reef systems to fish for their families' evening meals. They were the brothers who sang in the church choirs on Sunday mornings, their voices a testament to the enduring faith of their community. They were entirely ordinary young men, filled with the typical aspirations, restless energy, and youthful naivete that characterized that specific phase of life anywhere in the world. However, they were coming of age in an environment that, despite its immense natural beauty and rich cultural heritage, offered severely limited economic horizons. The geographical isolation that fostered such strong communal bonds also restricted commercial development. For many young men finishing their secondary education on the island, the path forward was often starkly limited to joining the military, leaving their ancestral home to seek low-wage labor on the United States mainland, or remaining on the island to face a stagnant local economy with exceedingly high rates of youth unemployment. It was precisely this vulnerability, this intersection of youthful ambition and economic stagnation, that the international drug syndicates so ruthlessly exploited. When the massive influx of methamphetamine began to flow through the commercial shipping ports of Pago Pago, concealed within everyday goods, the syndicates required a vast, decentralized, and expendable workforce to manage the local logistics of their operation. They did not import their own cartel members to walk the streets of the island. That would have drawn immediate and unwanted attention from federal authorities. Instead, they recruited locally targeting the restless and economically disadvantaged youth. The initial recruitment pitches were deeply deceptive, preying upon the young men's desire for financial independence and material success. These youths were initially offered seemingly innocuous roles within the syndicate's logistical chain. They were hired as couriers, tasked with transporting sealed packages, running errands, or coordinating the movement of specific shipping containers from the port to designated warehouses across the island. For a young man who had previously struggled to find even minimum wage employment, the sudden influx of untraceable cash was intoxicating. They were handed wads of currency simply for driving a vehicle from one side of the island to the other, a task that required no special skills but offered financial rewards that vastly exceeded whatever their parents might earn in a month of legitimate, backbreaking labor. The transition from unwitting courier to deeply entangled syndicate operative was incredibly rapid and entirely by design. The masterminds behind the transnational smuggling rings understood that the most effective way to secure absolute loyalty and ensure the permanent silence of their local workforce was through the bonds of chemical dependency. Methamphetamine is a profoundly addictive stimulant, one that violently alters the brain chemistry and creates a rapid, inescapable physical and psychological reliance. The young men, who began as simple delivery drivers, were inevitably exposed to the product they were transporting. Some were offered the drug as a bonus, a way to stay awake during long nocturnal shifts moving illicit cargo. Others, flush with their newfound illicit wealth and surrounded by a culture of sudden reckless consumption, began using the substance recreationally, entirely unaware of the catastrophic toll it would instantly take on their bodies and minds. Once the addiction took hold, the trap was definitively sprung. The syndicates no longer needed to pay these young men in cash, they could now pay them in product. The couriers were transformed into low-level distributors, forced to sell small quantities of the drug within their own villages just to secure enough methamphetamine to stave off the agonizing symptoms of withdrawal. This forced transition into street-level distribution is where the true horror of the situation began to manifest, leading directly to the wave of disappearances that would soon paralyze the island. The young men, now struggling with severe addiction, were inherently unreliable business partners in a profoundly unforgiving industry. They were given specific quantities of methamphetamine to sell, with the strict expectation that they would return a predetermined amount of money to their syndicate handlers. However, the overpowering demands of their own addiction frequently compromised their ability to fulfill these brutal quotas. A young dealer might consume a portion of the product he was supposed to sell, or he might make the fatal mistake of selling the drug on credit to another desperate addict within his village, unable to collect the funds when the syndicate came to collect. These financial shortfalls created what the criminal underworld refers to as drug debts. In the legitimate business world, a debt might lead to bankruptcy or legal arbitration. In the shadow economy of transnational methamphetamine trafficking, a drug debt is a capital offense. The syndicates operating in American Samoa view these debts not merely as a loss of revenue, but as a direct challenge to their authority and a catastrophic vulnerability in their operational security. The environment of the island further exacerbated the danger for these indebted young men. In a society where anonymity is impossible, there was nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The syndicate enforcers, often local individuals who had risen through the ranks by demonstrating a willingness to commit extreme acts of violence, knew exactly where these young men lived, who their parents were, and what routes they took to navigate the island. A suffocating atmosphere of paranoia began to replace the traditional trust that had once defined village life. The young men who had become entangled in the trade found themselves isolated, cut off from the protective embrace of their families due to the shame and secrecy surrounding their addiction, and constantly hunted by the ruthless enforcers of the cartels. They lived in a perpetual state of terror, jumping at every shadow and terrified of every approaching vehicle. Furthermore, the syndicates were acutely aware of the growing concern among local law enforcement and federal agencies. This awareness bred a deep, lethal suspicion within the upper echelons of the criminal networks. Any young distributor who was seen speaking to a police officer, or who simply displayed behavior deemed erratic or untrustworthy, was immediately suspected of acting as a confidential informant. Whether the perceived transgression was an unpaid drug debt or the mere suspicion of cooperation with law enforcement, the syndicate's response was uniform immediate and permanent. The order would be given, and a young man would simply be erased from the fabric of the island. The profound tragedy of these victims lies not just in the brutal termination of their young lives, but in the systematic exploitation of their vulnerability. They were entirely outmatched by the sophisticated, multi-billion-dollar transnational enterprises that had invaded their home. They were promised wealth and independence, but were instead given addiction, terror, and ultimately an unmarked watery grave. As the disappearances multiplied, the families left behind were forced to endure a specific, excruciating kind of psychological torture. Because the syndicates utilized the deep ocean trenches to dispose of the bodies, there was never any physical evidence of a crime, no remains to recover, and no closure to be had. Mothers and fathers were left to wander the desolate beaches, looking out at the vast, indifferent expanse of the Pacific Ocean, knowing in their hearts that the water held the answers they desperately sought, yet entirely powerless to compel the sea to surrender its horrifying secrets. The tight-knit community of American Samoa, previously defined by its collective joy and mutual support, found itself fundamentally fractured, drowning in a profound, unspoken grief, and a paralyzing fear of the invisible predators walking among them. The year 2018 marked the definitive tipping point for American Samoa, the precise historical moment when the theoretical threat of transnational drug trafficking metastasized into a tangible, suffocating reality that choked the life out of the island. Up until this juncture, the infiltration had been a slow, insidious creep, a subtle poison seeping into the economic margins of a territory. But suddenly, the floodgates were violently thrown open. The volume of pure methamphetamine arriving through the commercial shipping lanes of Pago Pago surged to absolutely unprecedented levels, overwhelming not just the severely under-equipped customs officials at the port, but the very moral and structural fabric of the community itself. This was the dark era where the idyllic, sun-drenched postcard facade of a territory finally cracked and crumbled, revealing a terrifying underworld that operated with absolute, lethal impunity right beneath the noses of the unsuspecting public. The complete transformation of the island was not heralded by the chaotic, deafening roar of automatic weapons that characterizes cartel wars in the Americas. Instead, it was an incredibly quiet, deeply sinister conquest. The transnational syndicates implicitly understood that drawing overt, loud attention was disastrous for long-term business, especially on an island where federal United States jurisdiction theoretically loomed. Therefore, they deliberately instituted a regime of terror that was entirely predicated on silence, profound invisibility, and the paralyzing, omnipresent fear of the unknown. The sudden influx of massive, untraceable drug profits acted as a highly corrosive acid on the traditional pillars of Samoan society. For centuries, the island had functioned smoothly on a deeply entrenched system of profound respect for elders, church leaders, and the traditional village chiefs. But the cartels introduced a new, infinitely more ruthless currency of absolute power. Young men who were previously relegated to the very bottom rungs of the social hierarchy suddenly found themselves flush with illicit cash, driving expensive, imported vehicles, and wielding a terrifying kind of shadow influence that completely bypassed all traditional authority structures. The island elders watched in helpless, muted horror as their ancestral villages were subtly and systematically occupied by this invisible enemy. The communal spaces that once hosted joyful gatherings and familial celebrations rapidly became shrouded in an atmosphere of intense, suffocating paranoia. Neighbors who had known each other for decades began to look at each other with deep, unspoken suspicion. The simple, everyday act of asking a casual question about a sudden change in someone's lifestyle became fraught with immediate, unspoken danger. The island's delicate social ecosystem was entirely upended, replaced by the cold, calculated, and deeply unforgiving laws of the criminal underworld, a desolate place where absolute loyalty was purchased with highly addictive chemicals, and the slightest hint of betrayal was punished with immediate, permanent erasure. As the shadow distribution network expanded aggressively across the island, so too did the inevitable, fatal complications of relying on a deeply addicted, highly vulnerable workforce. Drug debts began to mount with terrifying speed. Couriers desperate for their next high consumed their own supply. Low-level street dealers were violently robbed by even more desperate addicts, and the strict, Uncompromising financial quotas imposed by the transnational bosses were frequently and inevitably missed. In the merciless, blood-soaked arithmetic of the cartels, a financial debt is never viewed as a simple mistake or a temporary setback. It is perceived as a profound insult, a direct challenge to authority, and a glaring operational vulnerability that must be eradicated. It was during this intensely volatile period, spanning from 2018 to 2020, that the island began to experience a chilling, widespread phenomenon that would forever scar its history and traumatize a generation. The youth of the island began to disappear. These were not the dramatic, high-speed abductions seen in cinematic thrillers. There were no screeching tires, no heavily armed, masked men kicking down front doors in the middle of the night to drag victims away. The disappearances were meticulously and coldly orchestrated to look exactly like spontaneous, voluntary departures, at least in the crucial initial hours. A young man deeply entangled in the syndicate's inescapable web would receive a quiet message or a subtle instruction to meet a superior under the guise of settling a lingering debt, discussing a new route, or receiving a fresh assignment. He would leave his family home, perhaps casually telling his mother or siblings he was just going out for a quick ride to see a friend, fully and genuinely expecting to return before the sun came up. He would kickstart his motorcycle, drive out into the heavy, humid tropical night, navigate the winding, unlit roads of the island, and literally vanish from the face of the earth. The morning after such a disappearance was always characterized by a slow, creeping dread that eventually blossomed into absolute, unadulterated panic within the household. A family would awaken to find a bed completely unslept in, a young man inexplicably missing from his morning chores and family obligations. Initially, there might be a frantic calling of friends, a desperate scouring of local hangouts and known haunts. In a community as small and intricately interconnected as American Samoa, a person simply cannot remain hidden for long without someone noticing their presence. When hours agonizingly turned into days without a single credible sighting or returned phone call, the terrifying, undeniable reality would begin to set in. The search parties that inevitably formed were driven by a frantic, localized desperation that is entirely unique to island communities. Whole villages would fan out across the territory, systematically combing through the dense, unforgiving, and deeply shadowed jungles that blanketed the steep volcanic slopes. Others would cautiously walk the jagged, treacherous black rock coastlines where the land abruptly and violently surrendered to the sea. It was precisely during these agonizing, exhaustive searches that the cruel, fragmented, and deeply unsettling clues of the night before were typically discovered. Searchers might stumble upon a familiar, perfectly functioning motorcycle, its engine long cold, parked haphazardly and inexplicably near a sheer cliff edge overlooking the violently crashing surf. They might find a single worn sandal, a discarded plastic lighter, or a piece of torn, familiar clothing snagged on the thick, thorny underbrush of a highly remote, rarely traveled trail. These physical remnants were profoundly horrifying precisely because of what they did not show in the story they refused to tell. There were absolutely never any signs of a physical struggle. There was no blood on the rocks, no disturbed earth to suggest a desperate fight for survival, no trailing footprints leading into the brush. The items looked exactly as though they had been simply abandoned by someone who had calmly walked to the edge of the world and evaporated into the salty, humid air. But the local population, slowly and painfully awakening to the terrifying reality of the cartels operating with impunity in their midst, intuitively knew the grim, unspeakable truth. These young men had not suddenly fled the island in search of a better life, nor had they decided to spontaneously start anew in the unforgiving wilderness. They had been summoned directly to their own quiet executions. The intensely quiet nature of these discoveries perfectly encapsulated the transnational syndicate's primary modus operandi. It was a perfectly executed, silent purge of liabilities. The local enforcers carrying out these intimate murders were often individuals who had grown up alongside the very victims they were tasked with eliminating, men whose souls had been entirely hollowed out and replaced by the promise of endless cartel money and the devastating psychological ravages of chronic methamphetamine abuse. They operated with a clinical, detached, and terrifying efficiency, deliberately ensuring that the act of murder was as invisible, traceless, and silent as the illicit drugs they helped smuggle through the port. They implicitly understood that a simple missing person case, especially one involving a known young drug user with a troubled history, would generate far less immediate federal law enforcement scrutiny than a brutally murdered corpse left rotting in the jungle. The ultimate, crowning horror of this dark era lay in the syndicate's chosen method of bodily disposal, a deeply calculated method that brutally capitalized on the island's unique, formidable, and isolating geography. American Samoa is surrounded by some of the deepest, most turbulent, and most unforgiving oceanic waters on the entire planet. Just a very short distance from the picturesque, sandy tourist beaches, the ocean floor drops precipitously into dark, crushing, freezing abysses, perpetually swept by incredibly powerful, unpredictable, and relentless South Pacific currents. The cartel enforcers utilize this immense, unstoppable natural force as the ultimate, silent accomplice to their heinous crimes. Under the heavy, suffocating shroud of darkness, far away from any prying eyes or security cameras, the victims, either physically incapacitated, heavily sedated, or already deceased, were taken out onto the open water in small, unremarkable fishing vessels. They were heavily and meticulously weighted down with whatever dense materials were readily at hand, heavy iron chains, solid concrete cinder blocks, or discarded, heavy machinery parts stolen from the port. They were then callously and unceremoniously pushed over the side of the boat, plunging into the black, freezing depths below. This specific, terrifying method guaranteed absolute, unyielding finality. The vast ocean swallowed the young men completely whole, dragging them down into an incredibly hostile environment where no human search and rescue operation, no matter how well funded or equipped, could ever reasonably hope to reach them. The powerful, shifting underwater currents ensured that even if the makeshift weights somehow failed or degraded over time, the bodies would be rapidly swept hundreds, perhaps thousands of miles away, lost forever in the vast, unfathomable expanse of the Pacific Ocean. This highly calculated strategy of vanishing victims inflicted a uniquely cruel, enduring psychological torture upon the families who were abruptly left behind to pick up the shattered pieces of their lives. The natural human process of grief requires a physical reality to anchor it, a tangible body to mourn, a marked grave to visit and tend to. The syndicates deliberately and maliciously denied these local families this fundamental, basic human right. Mothers and fathers were left to stand helplessly on the rocky, wind-whipped shores, staring out at the endlessly rolling, indifferent waves, their minds perpetually tormented by the unanswerable, haunting questions of exactly how their sons died, what their final terrified thoughts were, and where their remains currently lay in the freezing dark. The complete absence of a physical body meant the absolute absence of closure, cruelly trapping entire families in a perpetual state of agonizing, unresolved limbo that slowly eroded their mental health. The island itself, which had once been a profound source of generational comfort, deep spiritual connection, and physical provision, transformed seemingly overnight into an omnipresent, unavoidable reminder of their profound, incalculable loss. Every crashing wave against the rocks sounded like a cruel, mocking whisper. Every dark, shadowed stretch of the jungle looked like a potential, hidden crime scene waiting to be unearthed. The profound fear that permeated every corner of the island was absolute and utterly paralyzing. No one dared to speak out publicly. No one dared to demand answers from the young men who suddenly had far too much money and far too much power, because absolutely everyone knew exactly what happened to those who asked too many questions, who missed a payment, or who caused too many operational problems for the bosses. They simply vanished without a single trace into the deep, dark blue, becoming permanent, agonizingly silent casualties of a brutal, global war they never even truly knew they were fighting, leaving behind an island permanently scarred by the invisible violence of the methamphetamine trade. The suffocating grip of fear that had paralyzed American Samoa for nearly 2 years reached a breaking point by the middle of 2020 as the scale of the disappearances became impossible to ignore even for a community so deeply conditioned to silence. The island, once a tapestry of interconnected families and communal trust, had been stretched to the point of structural failure by the relentless, invisible invasion of methamphetamine. While the syndicate bosses operated with a cold, calculated sense of impunity, they had drastically underestimated the latent, simmering rage that was building beneath the surface of a quiet village life. It was no longer just the families of the vanished who were suffering. The entire territory was witnessing the systematic destruction of its youth and the total collapse of its traditional social order. The breaking point arrived not as a singular, explosive event, but as a cumulative, unbearable accumulation of grief and terror that finally spurred a clandestine, desperate reach for help beyond the island shores. The local authorities, long marginalized and systematically outmaneuvered by the logistical sophistication of the cartels, finally found the political and moral mandate to engage the full might of the United States federal government. This was the inception of a massive, multifaceted, and long overdue counteroffensive, a coordinated federal intervention that would finally pierce the veil of silence that had protected the criminal networks for so long. The intervention was not a singular action, but a highly complex and meticulously planned series of operations that signaled a total shift in the federal government's approach to the Pacific Territory. Leading the charge were the specialized units of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, working in seamless, highly classified coordination with the Drug Enforcement Administration and the local law enforcement agencies who were finally provided with the resources, equipment, and legal authority they had been starved of for years. The objective was not merely to arrest the street-level distributors or to intercept a single shipment of contraband, but to fundamentally dismantle the entire infrastructure of the transnational syndicates that had turned Pago Pago into their private, oceanic transit hub. The investigators recognized that the key to unraveling the entire operation lay in tracing the logistical supply chain backward from the dark, silent waters where the bodies were disposed of, all the way back to the legitimate shipping containers arriving from the United States mainland. This was an arduous, painstakingly slow process that required the synthesis of massive amounts of data, surveillance, and the risky, long-term cultivation of confidential informants from within the very ranks of the criminal networks who were now finally willing to break their silence in exchange for safety and immunity. As the federal net began to tighten, the first major breakthrough occurred not in the dense jungles or on the high seas, but in the sterile, high-tech environments of data analysis and surveillance monitoring. The authorities began to meticulously cross-reference the shipping manifests of every single container that had entered the port of Pago Pago over the previous 24 months with the financial records of the individuals suspected of being involved in the drug trade. This massive, data-driven effort revealed an undeniable, chilling pattern of systematic corruption and operational fraud. They identified the precise mechanisms by which the cartels had exploited the relaxed customs protocols, mapping the exact routes the illicit cargo took from the moment it arrived at the dock until it reached the secret storage facilities across the island. The federal investigators, now bolstered by the deployment of advanced, industrial-grade scanning technology to the port, finally had the tools to look inside the seemingly mundane, everyday items that had for so long served as the perfect, impenetrable camouflage for the methamphetamine. The discovery of hidden compartments within innocuous automotive parts and the recovery of high-purity product from within sealed shipments of industrial supplies provided the concrete, irrefutable evidence needed to begin systematically dismantling the syndicate's logistical advantages. However, the most dangerous and essential phase of the investigation involved the slow, terrifying process of turning the local operatives against their handlers. The federal agents knew that the true masters of the network would never be caught through standard investigations. They were too far removed, too shielded by layers of intermediaries. To reach them, the investigators had to convince the low-level couriers and distributors to speak, a task that required overcoming the absolute, paralyzing terror that the cartels had cultivated for years. They had to prove to these young men that the federal government was more powerful and, crucially, more capable of providing protection than the syndicate enforcers who had been systematically executing their peers. This required a profound psychological and emotional effort, with agents spending countless hours in secure, off-the-books locations, listening to the harrowing, traumatic testimonies of young men who were still living in fear for their lives. These informants, broken by the weight of the secrets they held, began to paint a terrifying, cohesive picture of the inner workings of the cartel's shadow justice system. They identified the specific individuals responsible for the internal purges, the men who had been tasked with the cold-blooded executions, and the specific boats used to transport the victims out to the deep-water disposal sites. The investigation reached a critical inflection point as the federal agents began to piece together the forensic reality of the disappearances. By analyzing mobile phone metadata, tracking the movements of suspected enforcer vehicles during the hours of darkness, and synthesizing the corroborated reports from multiple, independent informants, the investigators began to reconstruct the final hours of several of the missing youth. They found that the cartels, despite their meticulous, cold-blooded efficiency, had left a digital trail. The persistence of the federal agents, combined with the gradual disintegration of the syndicate's internal code of silence, finally allowed them to move against the highest-level targets operating on the island. The coordinated raids that followed were carried out with the precision of a military operation. Under the cover of early morning darkness, federal agents and specialized law enforcement teams simultaneously descended upon multiple, pre-identified locations across American Samoa. They targeted the fortified warehouses where the drugs were processed, the hidden residences of the high-ranking syndicate lieutenants, and the offices of individuals suspected of having compromised the port's customs security. The atmosphere in Pago Pago during these raids was electric, a stark contrast to the thick, oppressive silence that had defined the previous 2 years. For the first time in years, the community witnessed a tangible, aggressive pushback against the invisible forces that had been systematically dismantling their lives. The arrests were swift and decisive, leaving the local criminal infrastructure in complete, chaotic disarray. As the primary enforcers and mid-level coordinators were handcuffed and transported to holding facilities, the fragile, fear-based loyalty that held the network together began to rapidly evaporate. The syndicate, which had functioned with such chilling, clinical, and unchecked power, suddenly appeared vulnerable, exposed, and entirely unshielded. The federal agents, now in possession of computers, financial documents, and communication logs, began to peel back the layers of the transnational onion. They were able to trace the communication lines and money transfers back to the mainland United States, identifying the original suppliers who had been using American Samoa as their convenient, low-risk, high-reward gateway to the South Pacific. The scope of the operation revealed the breathtaking audacity of the criminals who had treated the entire territory as their private, disposable asset. One of the most crucial aspects of the federal intervention was the dedicated, focused attention placed upon the families of the disappeared. For the first time, the federal government officially acknowledged the gravity of the situation and the systemic failure that had allowed it to spiral out of control. Agents reached out to the grieving parents, not just to conduct interviews, but to provide a sense of official validation and support. The investigators utilized the information obtained from the informants to narrow down the specific, deep water locations where the bodies were likely disposed of. While the vast, unforgiving nature of the ocean prevented the recovery of physical remains in the vast majority of cases, the formal investigation into these disappearances provided the families with the only semblance of truth they had ever received. They were finally told, with the gravity of official federal documentation, exactly what had likely happened to their sons and why. This was a profound, deeply painful, and absolutely necessary step toward the long, arduous process of societal healing. The realization that the federal government was finally taking the violence against their children seriously was a turning point for the local community, breaking the paralyzing, suffocating spell of isolation and fear. As the investigations deepened and the legal proceedings began, the sheer, staggering scale of the crime became undeniably evident. The federal prosecutors, armed with the evidence gathered during the raids and the testimony provided by the now cooperating witnesses, began to assemble a case that would ensure these transnational criminals would never again be able to operate with such impunity. The legal strategy was designed to reach beyond the local enforcers, directly targeting the high-level architects of the smuggling network. This was not just about catching street-level dealers. It was about demonstrating that the United States would not permit any of its territories to be used as a staging ground for the global, predatory trade in methamphetamine. The investigation exposed the systemic weaknesses in the shipping and logistical infrastructure that had been exploited for years, leading to immediate, large-scale upgrades in security protocols, technology, and customs oversight at the port of Pago Pago. The port, once the unwitting, helpless accomplice to the cartel's expansion, was transformed into a secure, monitored environment, effectively shutting down the primary conduit for the illicit, life-destroying cargo that had so recently flooded the island. The federal intervention served as a necessary, brutal, and long-awaited reckoning for the transnational syndicates. It exposed the reality that no matter how isolated, how seemingly peaceful, or how strategically convenient a community might be, it can never be truly immune to the global, predatory reach of organized crime. The era of the silent disappearances, of the unchecked, brutal purging of the island's youth, was finally brought to an end, not through the actions of the cartels themselves, but through the overwhelming, unified, and resolute force of federal justice, reclaiming the territory from the darkness that had once threatened to consume it entirely. The transition from the chaos of the federal raids to the sterile, somber environment of the courtroom marked the beginning of a final, agonizing chapter for the people of American Samoa. As the legal proceedings unfolded, the islanders were forced to confront the granular, clinical details of a tragedy that had previously existed only in the form of whispered rumors and terrifying, unconfirmed fears. The trial, held in the federal district court, was a monumental exercise in transparency that sought to systematically dismantle the syndicate's power structure while simultaneously providing a public account of the atrocities committed in the name of profit. For the families of the victims, the courtroom became a place of profound suffering, where the abstract nature of their loss was replaced by the cold, undeniable, and harrowing evidence of systemic murder. They sat in the public gallery, a quiet, stoic presence, listening as the prosecution methodically laid out the timeline of the disappearances, the financial machinations of the drug debts, and the cold, detached logic used by the enforcers to justify the execution of their own brothers and peers. The courtrooms were filled with the palpable weight of grief, yet also a resolute, collective demand for accountability that had been silenced for far too long. The legal strategy employed by the federal prosecutors was designed to strike at the very heart of the transnational hierarchy. Rather than allowing the defense to categorize the murders as isolated, disorganized acts of violence committed by rogue individuals, the prosecution meticulously built a narrative of premeditated, corporate-style management of criminal operations. They presented detailed financial records that tracked the flow of illicit funds from the mainland United States through the island's banking systems, demonstrating the clear, unbroken line of command that linked the high-ranking cartel architects to the low-level enforcers in Pago Pago. The prosecutors argued that the disappearances were not accidental or collateral damage, but a necessary, planned component of the syndicate's business model. Every single life taken was described as incalculated expenditure, a loss written off on a balance sheet intended to maintain the integrity of a high-stakes, multi-million-dollar logistics network. This narrative was crucial in ensuring that the culpability was not just limited to those who pulled the triggers, but extended to those who provided the orders, the capital, and the infrastructure that made such atrocities possible in the first place. Testimony from the former syndicate operatives, the young men who had once been on the front lines and were now cooperating witnesses, provided the most devastating, intimate insight into the machinery of death. These individuals, visibly traumatized and speaking in guarded, broken voices, described the psychological toll of being forced to choose between their own survival and the lives of those they had grown up with. They detailed the specific meetings where orders for removals were discussed with the same cold, detached clinical precision as a shipment of goods. They spoke of the deep-seated paranoia that had taken root within the group, where any deviation from the established rules, a missing payment, a moment of hesitation, or a perceived lack of loyalty, was viewed as an existential threat to the organization. One witness recounted the harrowing process of preparing a victim for disposal, describing the routine nature of the task in a way that silenced the entire courtroom. It was a stark, unflinching look at the total erasure of humanity that occurs when an individual is reduced to a commodity, stripped of their identity, and discarded as a liability. The defense, predictably, attempted to cast doubt on the testimony of these witnesses, framing them as self-serving individuals seeking leniency in exchange for fabricating stories of institutionalized murder. However, the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. They supplemented the oral testimonies with a mountain of forensic data, cell phone location pings that placed the defendants and the victims at the same desolate locations at the exact times of the disappearances, financial transaction logs that corroborated the timeline of the drug debts, and encrypted communication logs that captured the cold, strategic discussions between the syndicate handlers regarding the need to eliminate suspected informers. The defense's attempt to paint the disappearances as something other than murder was systematically dismantled by the sheer weight of this multifaceted evidence. The jury was presented with a portrait of a criminal enterprise that was not only highly organized and technologically sophisticated, but also fundamentally predatory and utterly indifferent to the human lives it destroyed in the pursuit of wealth. The courtroom, often filled with the heavy, stifling atmosphere of the tropics, became a theater of harsh, uncomfortable truths, where the romanticized image of the criminal underworld was stripped away to reveal the raw, unadulterated ugliness of the reality. Throughout the proceedings, the judge and prosecutors made a concerted effort to center the voices of the families who had been left behind. Their victim impact statements were perhaps the most significant, emotional, and defining moments of the entire trial. These statements forced the court to look past the technical, legal definitions of the crimes and face the enduring, intergenerational trauma that had been inflicted upon the community. A mother described the final, seemingly ordinary conversation she had with her son before he left on his motorcycle, never to return. A sister spoke of the hollow, lingering uncertainty that had defined her family's life for years, and the profound, unresolved grief that continued to gnaw at their peace of mind. These testimonies underscored the reality that the victims were not merely statistical casualties of a war on drugs, but individuals with dreams, families, and a place within a deeply rooted community that would be permanently altered by their absence. The judge's demeanor throughout these statements was one of solemn, respectful recognition, emphasizing that the justice being sought was not only for the state, but for the families whose dignity had been so ruthlessly trampled by the syndicate. As the trial reached its conclusion, the weight of the sentencing phase brought a sense of finality that the island had desperately craved for years. The individuals who were found guilty of orchestrating the logistical infrastructure and directing the systematic executions were handed down severe, multi-decade sentences, ensuring that they would effectively disappear from society in a way that mirrored what they had forced upon their victims. The courtroom, which had served as a stage for this public reckoning, witnessed a mixture of relief and lingering sadness as the verdicts were delivered. For the people of American Samoa, the trial was not merely a legal victory, it was a profound act of societal reclaiming. By bringing the hidden, invisible violence into the light of the law, they had effectively signaled the end of the syndicate's reign of terror. The conviction of the architects behind the operation demonstrated that no amount of geographic isolation or logistical obfuscation could protect those who preyed upon the community. It provided a powerful, clear message that the territory of American Samoa would no longer tolerate the presence of transnational entities that sought to exploit its people for the sake of the illicit global drug trade. The outcome of the trial also had significant, lasting implications for the justice system's handling of crimes within unincorporated, unorganized territories. It highlighted the critical need for increased federal support, specialized resources, and a more robust, long-term commitment to the security and legal integrity of remote regions. The legal proceedings themselves served as a blueprint for how to approach similar cases in the future, demonstrating the necessity of integrating data forensics, confidential informant management, and the protection of victim communities into a cohesive, effective strategy. The legacy of the trial was a strengthened, more proactive approach to regional security, one that acknowledged the unique vulnerabilities of island territories and prioritized the prevention of future transnational incursions. While the physical absence of the victims could never be rectified by a verdict, the court's decision provided the families with a necessary sense of external validation, a recognition that the terror they had endured was real, that the crimes committed against their loved ones were unequivocally recognized as such by the highest authority, and that the perpetrators would be held to the highest standard of accountability possible under the law. Ultimately, the trial concluded with a somber, reflective atmosphere. The courtroom, once a place of intense, legal combat, returned to its standard, quiet proceedings, but the impact of what had transpired remained embedded in the cultural memory of the island. The trial was the final, formal chapter of a period that had almost torn the territory apart. As the families left the courthouse, they did so not with a sense of joy or victory, but with a weary, profound sense of closure that had been denied to them for so long. The tragedy of the disappeared youth had become a permanent, integral part of the history of American Samoa, a cautionary tale about the fragile nature of tranquility in an increasingly globalized, interconnected world. The trial had ensured that these stories would not be lost in the vast, indifferent currents of the Pacific, but rather preserved in the historical record as a testament to the resilience of a people who, having been pushed to the very brink of destruction, chose to stand together, demand the truth, and reclaim their peace from the darkness that had tried to silence them. The legal proceedings were the formal mechanism through which the island finally exorcised the demons that had taken up residence in its midst, providing the foundational stability needed to move toward a future that would never again be so brutally compromised. The scars left behind by the dark years of 2018 to 2020 in American Samoa run deeper than any judicial verdict could ever hope to fully reach. While the federal trials brought a necessary sense of legal finality, and the dismantling of the syndicate's immediate logistical infrastructure provided a semblance of security, the true, lasting legacy of this era is found in the fundamental and permanent transformation of the island's collective psyche. The peaceful, trusting sanctuary that Pago Pago once claimed to be has been irrevocably altered, replaced by a more guarded, cynical, and acutely aware society. The trauma of the disappeared youth, the silent, invisible purges, and the brutal exploitation of the territory's geographic and political vulnerabilities have left an indelible mark on the cultural memory of the people. This period serves as a harrowing, sobering reminder that no community, regardless of its distance from the major centers of global power or the intensity of its cultural bonds, is truly immune to the ravenous, predatory reach of transnational organized crime. The drug trade, with its ruthless capacity to turn neighbor against neighbor and community trust into a weapon of paranoia, has taught the island a lesson that will be passed down for generations to come. The societal reflection in the aftermath of the federal Tsan Quet has been characterized by an intense, often painful, process of introspection. The islanders have had to grapple with the realization that their own unique status as a United States territory, which they had long viewed as a source of stability and support, was precisely the weakness that invited such devastation. The exploitation of legitimate shipping lanes and the ease with which illicit goods could pass through the port have forced a complete, fundamental reevaluation of how the island interacts with the outside world. There is now a persistent, quiet vigilance that permeates daily life in Pago Pago. The deep-seated, traditional trust that once allowed for an open, unshielded society has been replaced by a more modern, cautious pragmatism. The community no longer takes its safety for granted, recognizing that the currents of the global economy carry not just goods, but also the potential for profound, systemic harm. This change in attitude is not merely a reaction to a past event. It is an ongoing, adaptive shift in the way the territory manages its independence and its security in an increasingly interconnected and often hostile global landscape. The legacy of the victims, those young men whose lives were so cruelly extinguished, remains the most poignant and unresolved aspect of this historical episode. Their memory is not honored by a grand monument, but by the quiet, daily persistence of their families who continue to live with the profound, echoing absence of their sons. The ocean, which was used by the syndicates as a silent accomplice to hide their crimes, has been transformed in the cultural imagination from a source of life and provision into a vast, indifferent tomb. The psychological burden carried by the parents who never received the closure of a funeral is a form of trauma that does not simply fade with time. It is woven into the very fabric of their daily experience. This enduring grief serves as a constant, haunting anchor, reminding the community of the true, personal cost of the drug trade. It is a reminder that behind the statistics of seized kilograms and dismantled networks, there were actual, living, breathing human beings whose futures were stolen and whose families were permanently shattered. The recognition of this human cost is essential to the ongoing process of healing, as it ensures that the tragedy is not sanitized or abstracted by the passage of time. Looking back at this dark period, the broader lesson for the international community is as stark as it is vital. The invasion of American Samoa by transnational syndicates exposes the reality of the global, predatory trade in synthetic stimulants, which operates with a cold, almost corporate efficiency that frequently outpaces the capabilities of local law enforcement. These syndicates do not respect borders, they do not recognize the sanctity of peaceful communities, and they are entirely indifferent to the cultural traditions of the locations they choose to exploit. Their strategy is one of surgical infiltration, using the existing, legitimate infrastructure of a society to hide their illicit operations in plain sight. This means that the defense against such entities requires more than just military or police strength. It requires a deep, comprehensive understanding of how these networks operate at every level, from the high-level financial flows that originate in major world cities to the ground-level logistical vulnerabilities in remote outposts. The federal intervention in American Samoa was successful only because it recognized this complexity and engaged the problem at its systemic roots, rather than focusing solely on the symptoms of the violence. The long-term health and security of American Samoa now depend on maintaining the progress that was won through such extreme, traumatic effort. The upgrades to port security, the increased federal cooperation, and the dismantling of the internal distribution networks are not one-time fixes. They are the foundation for a permanent, heightened state of readiness. The island must continue to balance its traditional cultural values with the necessary requirements of modern, vigilant security. This is an inherently difficult, delicate challenge, as it risks eroding the very openness and communal harmony that make the territory unique. However, the experience of the last decade has proven that the alternative, an unchecked, invisible occupation by organized crime, is infinitely more destructive. The challenge for the future leaders of the territory is to cultivate a society that is both deeply rooted in its heritage and intelligently, robustly defended against the external threats that are an inevitable consequence of the modern, globalized world. The memory of the lost youth must serve as the primary motivation for this vigilance, a perpetual, silent warning against the dangers of complacency and the risks of unchecked global connectivity. Furthermore, the socioeconomic conditions that made the local youth so vulnerable to the syndicate's recruitment tactics remain an area that requires urgent, sustained attention. The hopelessness that arises from economic stagnation is the fertile soil in which the seeds of organized crime take root. If the island is to truly protect its future, it must invest in creating genuine, sustainable opportunities for its young people, ensuring that they have meaningful, productive paths that do not lead them into the arms of predators offering the toxic lure of easy money. This is not just a matter of economic policy, it is a matter of profound, fundamental societal security. Providing the youth with a stake in the success and stability of their own community is the most effective way to insulate them from the influence of external criminal networks. The trauma of the past few years has already instilled a heightened sense of awareness in the younger generation, a cynical, cautious understanding of the world that their predecessors perhaps lacked. This awareness, when harnessed through positive, collective action, can become a powerful, protective force for the island's future. The story of American Samoa between 2018 and 2020 is one that should resonate far beyond the shores of the Pacific. It is a story of how a small, beautiful, and deeply traditional community was forced to confront the harsh, unrelenting realities of the global drug trade. It is a story of systemic failure, of profound, individual suffering, and ultimately of a collective, desperate struggle for reclamation. It demonstrates that the most dangerous threats are often the ones that operate in the shadows, using the very mechanisms of our daily lives to facilitate their destruction. The resolution of the case did not bring back the dead, nor did it erase the years of terror, but it did restore the community's sense of agency, proving that they are not mere victims of a larger, uncontrollable global machine. By reclaiming their territory and ensuring that their voices were heard in the halls of federal power, the people of American Samoa have set a precedent for resilience. They have shown that while a community may be small, its resolve to protect its future, its honor, and its children is not. As the years pass, the specific details of the individual crimes may fade into the historical archives, but the deeper, more painful lesson will remain etched in the consciousness of the territory. The silence that once gripped the island has been broken, and the willingness to speak, to demand accountability, and to engage the full resources of the law has become the new, essential standard of the post-crisis era. The tragedy serves as a perennial, solemn reminder that peace is not merely the absence of open conflict. It is a dynamic, active state that requires constant, vigilant maintenance. The people of American Samoa carry the weight of their history with a quiet, dignified resolve, ensuring that their collective experience informs a future that is more secure, more aware, and more unified in its commitment to protecting the values that define them. The Pacific Ocean, once a source of terror and an agent of concealment, continues to roll on, indifferent and vast. But for the people living on the shores of Pago Pago, it is no longer the silent master of their destiny. They have reclaimed their home from the dark, invisible forces that once threatened to swallow it, and they stand now with a clarity of purpose that is the hard-won, enduring legacy of their darkest, most challenging, and most transformative years. The long, winding road to recovery for American Samoa is not measured in years, but in the slow, meticulous rebuilding of institutional trust and the persistent effort to heal a collective soul shattered by the systematic cruelty of the methamphetamine era. As the island moves forward into the latter half of the 20s, the shadow of the events occurring between 2018 and 2020 remains an ever-present, though increasingly distant, point of reference. The community has entered a phase of stabilization that prioritizes the fortification of civil structures against the recurrence of the sophisticated, transnational criminal incursions that nearly brought the territory to its knees. This period of reflection is fundamentally defined by a commitment to transparency and a proactive, rather than reactive, approach to governance. The local government, in close and sustained partnership with federal entities, has implemented comprehensive security protocols that now treat the port of Pago Pago not merely as a commercial entry point, but as a critical, high-risk security zone that demands constant vigilance. This shift represents a fundamental maturation of the territory's relationship with its own logistical infrastructure, acknowledging that in an era of globalized crime, the maintenance of physical borders is inseparable from the preservation of social health. Beyond the technological and procedural upgrades, the most profound changes are happening within the cultural and social spheres of the island. The tragedy of the disappeared youth forced a painful, necessary reckoning with the vulnerabilities inherent in the traditional, tight-knit societal structure. While the deep, familial bonds that characterize Samoa remain a source of immense strength, they are now tempered by a new, collective understanding of the dangers posed by isolationism and an over-reliance on informal systems of support. The community has become more adept at identifying the signs of distress, the sudden changes in behavior, the uncharacteristic wealth, and the creeping influence of outside actors that once signaled the onset of the drug trade's infiltration. There is a newfound willingness to engage with law enforcement, a departure from the historical code of silence that previously hindered investigations. This development, while difficult for a culture that places such high value on communal privacy, is viewed as an essential survival mechanism in a world where transnational crime seeks to weaponize silence for its own gain. The families who were most deeply affected by the disappearances have become the most vocal, influential advocates for this new culture of transparency. Their endurance and their refusal to let the memories of their children be erased have turned them into the moral conscience of the territory. Many of them have organized support groups and educational initiatives that focus on the dangers of addiction and the psychological impact of criminal exploitation. By speaking openly about the trauma they endured, they have dismantled the stigma that once surrounded the victims of the drug trade, transforming their personal grief into a powerful tool for societal change. These efforts are supported by an increased commitment from the federal government to provide consistent, long-term counseling and trauma services, recognizing that the healing process is a generational endeavor that requires more than just judicial outcomes. The presence of these resources within the community is a testament to the fact that the territory is no longer being treated as a forgotten, peripheral outpost, but as an integral part of the nation that deserves and demands protection and support. The economic landscape of American Samoa is also undergoing a transformative, necessary evolution. The recognition that economic stagnation is the primary incubator for organized crime has led to a more strategic, inclusive approach to development. There is a renewed focus on creating local opportunities that align with the territory's unique geographic position and cultural strengths, providing the youth with viable, dignified paths that do not involve leaving the island or succumbing to the illicit temptations of the shadow economy. The goal is to build an economy that is resilient, diversified, and fundamentally rooted in the stability of the local population. By investing in education, vocational training, and the growth of sustainable industries, the territory is actively working to eliminate the specific socioeconomic vulnerabilities that the cartels so successfully exploited in the past. This is a complex, long-term challenge that requires significant investment and political will, but it is the only sustainable strategy for ensuring that the dark era of the drug trade remains a historical anomaly rather than a recurring cycle. The relationship between the island and the vast Pacific Ocean, which for so long was viewed through a lens of fear and unresolved grief, is also beginning to shift toward one of reconciliation and renewed reverence. The ocean, despite the horrors that were perpetrated within its depths, remains the foundational lifeblood of the Samoan people. The community is finding ways to reclaim their coastal spaces, organizing commemorative events, and building local memorials that honor the lives lost, not in sorrow, but in a defiant celebration of their humanity. These rituals are important for the collective healing of the territory, as they allow for the public processing of grief and the assertion of communal ownership over the physical spaces that were once contaminated by the presence of the criminal syndicates. The ability to return to the beaches and the waters with a sense of peace, rather than paralyzing fear, is perhaps the clearest indicator of the community's resilience and its determination to move past the trauma that was forced upon it. The role of the church and traditional village leadership also continues to be central to this ongoing period of reflection and societal strengthening. The spiritual guidance and communal stability provided by these institutions have been vital in navigating the aftermath of the crisis. There is a renewed emphasis on the traditional values of service, mutual support, and moral responsibility, which are being adapted to meet the challenges of a modern, interconnected world. The village chiefs and church leaders work closely with law enforcement and community organizers to ensure that the fabric of society remains intact, acting as the primary line of defense against the encroaching influence of external, destructive forces. Their involvement demonstrates a harmonious, effective integration of ancestral wisdom with contemporary security practices, a unique approach that characterizes the ongoing development of the territory's social defenses. It is a testament to the enduring power of the Samoan culture that it has not only survived the assault of the transnational cartels, but is actively evolving to ensure its future protection. Looking toward the horizon, American Samoa stands as a stark, important example of the cost of complacency in the face of globalized crime. The territory's journey from the depths of a 2018 to 2020 tragedy to its current state of heightened vigilance and ongoing healing is a story of resilience that deserves to be studied by other small, vulnerable communities worldwide. The lessons learned here, the necessity of systemic institutional reform, the importance of fostering social trust, and the fundamental requirement of addressing the root causes of economic and social vulnerability are universal. The island's experience serves as a powerful reminder that while the forces of transnational crime are immense, highly resourced, and deeply predatory, they are not invincible when confronted by a unified, resolute community that refuses to remain silent. The sovereignty of the territory and the safety of its citizens are not just legal concepts. They are daily, lived achievements that require the constant, dedicated participation of everyone within the community. As the years continue to pass, the memory of the disappeared will become a part of the cultural tapestry, a somber, defining chapter in the long, storied history of the islands. The legacy of those who were lost is ultimately one of survival, for it was their tragic, unnecessary absence that compelled the community to awaken, to speak, and to reclaim its future. The territory is now more cautious, more aware, and more unified in its commitment to its own defense. The path forward remains difficult, with the ever-present threat of future incursions and the ongoing need to manage the social and economic pressures of the modern world. However, the islanders now possess a foundational clarity and a sense of collective purpose that was absent during the dark, silent years of the infiltration. They have learned that their greatest strength lies not in their isolation, but in their connectivity, not just with each other, but with the broader systems of justice and protection that they now actively participate in and help shape. In the final assessment, the story of American Samoa is one of profound, transformative survival. It is an account of a community that was forced to confront the absolute worst of the global order, and in doing so, discovered the absolute best of its own resilience. The territory remains a place of breathtaking beauty, where the volcanic peaks and the deep Pacific waters continue to define the rhythm of daily life. But there is now a deeper, more enduring strength in the people, a quiet, steely determination that is the hard-won legacy of the trials they have endured. They move forward with a full understanding of the world's complexities, an unwavering commitment to the safety of their youth, and a profound, collective pride in having emerged from the shadow of the drug trade with their spirit, their culture, and their identity firmly intact. The future of American Samoa is not something that will happen to them. It is something they are actively, decisively, and collectively building, day by day, wave by wave, ensuring that the peace they now possess is as enduring as the ocean that surrounds them. The narrative arc of American Samoa's ordeal, from the initial, silent infiltration by transnational methamphetamine cartels to the painful, public reckoning of the federal trials, ultimately concludes not with a simple resolution, but with an enduring, sobering wisdom. This wisdom is now woven into the fabric of daily life in Pago Pago, serving as a permanent bulwark against the return of the darkness that once threatened the island's very soul. The finality of the legal proceedings, while providing a necessary measure of justice for the families of the vanished, was never truly the end of the story. Rather, it was the transition into a new, more mature phase of existence for the territory, one where the romanticized, idyllic notion of island life has been tempered by a pragmatic, sophisticated awareness of the global forces that constantly exert pressure on isolated communities. This era of heightened consciousness is the most significant, long-term consequence of the struggle, and it dictates how the people of American Samoa now define their place in a world that is far more interconnected and far more dangerous than they once believed possible. The collective memory of this period acts as a perpetual, silent guard, ensuring that the complacency of the past cannot easily reemerge. Every institutional safeguard now in place, from the advanced, high-resolution scanning technology at the port to the integrated cross-agency communication networks, is a testament to the fact that the territory has learned from its systematic exploitation. There is a profound, shared understanding that the port is the primary, vital artery of the island, and therefore, it must be defended with a level of rigor that was absent during the initial surge of the illicit trade. This is not merely a matter of administrative policy, it is a cultural consensus, an agreement among the people that the preservation of their safety is a communal responsibility that cannot be outsourced or neglected. The trauma of the disappearances has left a residue of vigilance that is passed down in the stories told within families and in the shared, unspoken knowledge that any deviation from the established, transparent norms is a potential threat that must be addressed immediately and directly. The emotional trajectory of the families who lost their loved ones remains the most sensitive, vital component of the island's healing. Their journey has been one of extraordinary, quiet bravery. By refusing to let the stories of their sons become mere footnotes in a federal criminal report, they have ensured that the human cost of the methamphetamine trade is never forgotten. Their persistent, dignified advocacy has created a lasting, supportive infrastructure within the territory, where those suffering from loss or grappling with the aftermath of addiction can find a sense of community and understanding. This infrastructure is a profound, vital addition to the island's social fabric, providing a buffer against the despair and isolation that the cartels once used as tools of control. The legacy of the victims is not found in the misery of their final moments, but in the strength and unity of the community that was forged in the fire of the collective effort to uncover the truth of their fate. Looking to the future, the resilience of American Samoa serves as a vital case study in the dynamics of regional security. It demonstrates that the most potent weapon against transnational organized crime is not necessarily the sheer volume of military or police force, but the active, informed, and resilient participation of the local population. When a community decides that it will no longer remain silent in the face of predatory violence, it fundamentally alters the risk-reward calculation for those who seek to exploit it. The cartel's primary advantage was their reliance on the islanders' fear and their inherent trust in the established, social, and logistical systems. By dismantling that fear and replacing it with a proactive, transparent, and collaborative approach to governance and security, the people of American Samoa effectively neutralized the very mechanisms that had once enabled their victimization. This transformation is a testament to the inherent, enduring strength of the community, and it provides a template for how other small, vulnerable territories can defend their sovereignty against the reach of global criminal networks. The ongoing socioeconomic development of a territory is now aligned with the critical imperative of fostering long-term stability and opportunity. There is a deep, foundational commitment to ensuring that the next generation of Samoans grows up in an environment where their ambitions are nurtured, where their potential is realized, and where they have a stake in the enduring success of their home. This involves not only formal education and vocational training, but also a focus on cultural preservation and the strengthening of the social bonds that are the ultimate internal defense against the influence of outside, destructive forces. The territory is building an economy that is less dependent on the unpredictable flows of the global trade and more rooted in the intrinsic, sustainable values of the local population. This, more than any law or security protocol, is the most robust, sustainable strategy for ensuring that the dark, silent years of the cartels do not return. The role of the traditional institutions, the churches, the village councils, and the elders remains as relevant and necessary as it has ever been. They provide the moral, spiritual, and social continuity that allows the territory to navigate the rapid, often disorienting changes of the modern world. Their integration into the broader security and legal strategy of the territory has been a key factor in the successful reclamation of the island's stability. By blending the ancient, deeply rooted values of the community with the necessary, contemporary tools of justice, the territory has created a unique, highly effective model for internal governance. This model is one that respects the fundamental, cultural identity of the Samoan people while acknowledging the realities of their status in an increasingly globalized, unpredictable world. It is a model that is resilient, adaptable, and deeply, authentically Samoan. In the final assessment, the story of American Samoa during these years is a reflection of the resilience of the human spirit in the face of calculated, systemic, and overwhelming evil. It is a narrative of profound loss, but also of profound reclamation. It is the story of a community that was forced to witness the total destruction of its peace, only to find the strength to rise, to confront the darkness, and to establish a new, more secure, and more vigilant standard for its own future. The ocean that surrounds the island, once an instrument of terror and concealment, is now viewed again as the life-giving, defining feature of the Samoan experience. The island stands as a testament to the fact that while the forces of organized crime are global, predatory, and incredibly persistent, they are ultimately no match for a community that chooses, unequivocally, to stand together and to demand its right to exist in peace and security. As the years continue to accumulate, the lessons learned during this period will become more deeply integrated into the cultural and historical consciousness of the territory. They will serve as a continuous, internal compass, guiding the island through the inevitable challenges of the future. The memory of the lost youth, the hard-fought legal victories, and the transformation of the island's security and social fabric will stand as a permanent, defining chapter in the history of the archipelago. American Samoa will move forward with a full, clear, and sobering understanding of the realities of the modern world, yet it will do so with the unshakable, profound confidence that comes from having already faced the darkest possible scenario and having survived it with its identity, its culture, and its communal integrity entirely intact. The peace that the people of Pago Pago now possess is not a fragile, temporary absence of conflict. It is a hard one, deeply rooted, and collectively maintained achievement that will be guarded with a vigilance that is the direct, enduring legacy of the struggles they have endured. They have reclaimed their home, and in doing so, they have redefined their future, ensuring that the waves of the Pacific will continue to tell the story of a people who, having been tested by the most absolute of darkness, ultimately chose to walk together into the light of their own, determined destiny. The journey of American Samoa through the crucible of the 2018 to 2020 methamphetamine crisis has reached a state of reflective maturity, where the raw edges of trauma are slowly being softened by the passage of time and the persistent work of societal reconstruction. As the territory looks back upon the years that shattered its innocence, it does so not with the frantic, fearful eyes of a victim, but with the measured, steady gaze of a society that has emerged from the depths and learned how to navigate the complex, often predatory currents of the global landscape. The story of this island is no longer defined solely by the infiltration of cartels or the tragic disappearance of its youth. It is now defined by the collective, ongoing choice to prioritize communal integrity over the false, fleeting allure of the shadow economy. This commitment to a higher standard of existence is not an abstract concept discussed in government offices. It is a lived, daily practice that informs the way the people of Pago Pago interact with their port, their neighbors, and the broader world. The island has become a beacon of a different kind of resilience, one that is built on the foundation of transparency, shared responsibility, and an unwavering, common dedication to the protection of the next generation. The institutional legacy of this period is perhaps the most tangible and lasting change, manifesting in a port facility that serves as a model for secure, remote territory logistics. The transformation of Pago Pago from a vulnerable, exploited conduit into a modern, highly monitored maritime hub is a testament to what can be achieved when local authorities and federal partners work in genuine, sustained alignment. This logistical security is not merely a technical accomplishment. It is a profound, psychological victory for the territory, providing the population with the assurance that their primary economic lifeline is no longer a pathway for the poison that once destabilized their lives. The presence of advanced scanning technologies, the professionalization of the customs workforce, and the establishment of robust, intelligence-sharing protocols have created a perimeter that is both efficient and effectively defended. This state of readiness is now the baseline expectation for the territory, ensuring that the vulnerabilities which were once so easily exploited are no longer available for any transnational entity to utilize, regardless of how sophisticated their criminal operations might be. However, the true, enduring work remains in the intangible, societal realm where the scars of the past still linger in the hearts of those who lost family members. The healing process here is delicate and deeply personal, requiring a constant, gentle validation of the tragedy that has occurred. The community has found that the best way to honor the memory of the disappeared is to create an environment where such a loss can never happen again. This involves a sustained, cultural emphasis on the value of every individual life, a message that is woven into the educational curriculum, the sermons of the church, and the deliberations of the village councils. By creating this profound, shared sense of worth, the community effectively immunizes its youth against the existential hollowness that once made them susceptible to the lures of the syndicate. This is a subtle, ongoing form of societal maintenance, where the collective focus remains on fostering the growth, stability, and emotional health of the young, ensuring they never feel compelled to seek meaning or purpose in the destructive, shadow-filled world of drug distribution. The role of the federal government has also evolved, shifting from an external, reactive force into a more deeply integrated, supportive partner in the territory's long-term prosperity. There is a newfound, mutual understanding that the security of American Samoa is inherently linked to the health and stability of the entire region. This partnership is now characterized by consistent investment in local infrastructure, specialized training for law enforcement, and a commitment to the socio-economic development of the territory. The federal government acknowledges that the most effective way to secure such a strategically vital location is to foster a local population that is prosperous, stable, and deeply committed to the rule of law. This alignment of interests between the territory's desire for safety and the federal government's mandate for regional stability has created a more stable and effective environment for managing the complex, often unpredictable challenges of the South Pacific. It is a relationship built on the lessons of the past, acknowledging that remote territories require not just oversight, but active, sustained engagement to thrive. The cultural narrative of American Samoa is now enriched by the story of its own survival, a narrative that is increasingly being understood as a vital, defining chapter of its history. This story is not one of shame, but of reclamation and strength. It is a story of a people who, having been blindsided by a global, systemic threat, found the moral clarity and the political resolve to stand their ground. This narrative serves as a powerful, unifying force, reminding every citizen that their resilience is their greatest, most enduring asset. It informs the way the island celebrates its heritage, the way it conducts its public business, and the way it approaches the future. There is a shared, unspoken sense of pride in knowing that the territory has weathered the worst and emerged not diminished, but fundamentally strengthened in its resolve to protect its unique, communal way of life. This narrative is a constant, affirming reminder of what can be accomplished when a people remain true to their core values, even when faced with the most formidable of external pressures. Looking beyond the shores of the islands, the experience of American Samoa offers a universal, critical lesson for the broader international community regarding the nature of modern, globalized criminal threats. The infiltration of the territory was not a fluke. It was a cold, deliberate application of an aggressive, predatory business model that seeks out the path of least resistance across the entire planet. By understanding the mechanisms of this infiltration, international law enforcement and intelligence agencies can better anticipate and counter similar threats in other vulnerable, isolated regions. The case of American Samoa provides a comprehensive, documented roadmap for how organized crime can be systematically dismantled when the efforts are centered on systemic reform, community engagement, and the protection of local populations. It highlights that the solution to such pervasive, transnational issues must be as multifaceted, sustained, and adaptive as the problems they seek to resolve. The island story is, in essence, a masterclass in the necessity of proactive, community-centered security in an increasingly interconnected and often hazardous world. The ongoing commitment to this path is evident in the daily life of the territory, where the memory of the difficult years has become a catalyst for continued, positive action. The people of Pago Pago are not living in the past, nor are they dwelling on the trauma. They are using the insights gained from those years to build a future that is more stable, more secure, and more intentionally designed. This is seen in the way the youth are now encouraged to pursue careers that support the territory's sustainable development, in the way local business initiatives are designed to foster long-term economic independence, and in the way the community celebrates its unity as a defense against future threats. The peace that now exists on the island is a deliberate, manufactured reality, guarded by a population that understands the fragility of tranquility and is willing to invest the necessary, daily effort to ensure its preservation. This is the ultimate, most profound achievement of the post-crisis era, the move from a passive, accidental existence to a proactive, intentional construction of a secure future. As the decade of the 20s progresses, the legacy of this time will continue to unfold, shaping the way American Samoa engages with the world. The lessons of the past will remain as a constant, internal guide, ensuring that the territory never again finds itself caught unaware in the dark. The memory of the lost youth will continue to be honored, not just in mourning, but in the vibrant, thriving lives of those who are currently building their futures on the island. The Pacific Ocean, once a witness to the depths of human cruelty, will continue to serve as the beautiful, boundless horizon of the Samoan people, its waves a rhythmic, constant reminder of the resilience that defines them. The people of American Samoa stand now with their eyes wide open, their resolve hardened by experience, and their hearts anchored in the community that has proven, beyond any doubt, that it possesses the strength to survive the unthinkable. They move forward as a united, determined, and deeply wise people, secure in the knowledge that they have reclaimed their destiny, their home, and their peace from the darkness that once attempted to claim it as its own. This is the final, true legacy of the years of struggle, a future that is theirs to shape, to protect, and to cherish, built upon the foundation of a resilience that will stand as a testament to the enduring spirit of their islands for all the years yet to come. The story of American Samoa's survival during the dark years of the methamphetamine crisis is, at its core, a testament to the enduring power of communal identity and the fundamental human refusal to be erased by forces that seek only to commodify and destroy. As we reach the final vantage point of this long and harrowing journey, we are not looking back at a mere sequence of events, but at a profound, transformative experience that has fundamentally redefined what it means to be a resident of this archipelago. The territory has not merely recovered, it has evolved. It has transitioned from a position of profound, trusting innocence to one of seasoned, strategic wisdom. This transformation is not a superficial change in policy or a temporary improvement in security. It is a deep-seated shift in the cultural consciousness, a permanent adjustment in how the community perceives its place in the world and its responsibility to protect the future of its people. The peace that now envelopes Pago Pago is not the fragile, unexamined silence of the past, but a earned, sturdy, and vigilantly maintained tranquility that is fortified by the memory of the immense cost of its loss. The role of the youth, who were once the primary targets of the syndicate's predatory recruitment, has been entirely inverted in the years since the federal intervention. They are now the primary custodians of the island's future, raised with a heightened awareness of the world's complexities and an instilled, deep-rooted skepticism toward anything that promises the illusion of easy wealth. The educational systems and community programs currently in place prioritize the cultivation of critical thinking, financial literacy, and the fostering of a strong, personal sense of purpose that transcends the lures of the shadow economy. This focus on empowering the next generation is the most vital, long-term defensive strategy the territory has adopted. By ensuring that its youth are not just passive recipients of the status quo but active, informed participants in the building of their own society, American Samoa is effectively insulating itself from the vulnerabilities that were so easily weaponized by the cartels a decade ago. The resilience of the current generation is not an abstract hope. It is a meticulously nurtured, active reality that serves as a testament to the lessons learned from the sacrifices of their predecessors. The geopolitical and institutional significance of the territory has also seen a constructive shift as a result of the trauma it endured. American Samoa is no longer a peripheral, easily overlooked outpost in the eyes of the United States federal government. The collaborative frameworks that were established during the height of the crisis have matured into a permanent, robust partnership that recognizes the territory's strategic importance and its specific, unique security needs. This partnership is characterized by a respectful, ongoing dialogue between local leadership and federal authorities, ensuring that the oversight, resources, and legal support required to maintain the territory's integrity are consistent and adaptive. The realization that the security of a single, remote territory is inextricably linked to the broader, regional stability of the Pacific has fundamentally changed the nature of the relationship, resulting in a more integrated, responsive, and effective security apparatus that is better equipped to deal with the realities of the 21st century. Within the villages, the traditional social structures, the church leadership, the council of elders, and the deep, familial networks have emerged from the crisis not as archaic relics of a bygone era, but as essential, adaptive institutions that are central to the territory's ongoing resilience. Their ability to synthesize ancient, communal values with modern, proactive security measures has been a decisive factor in the island's recovery. There is now a seamless integration between the traditional responsibilities of community care and the contemporary requirements of public safety. When a village leader now addresses their community, they do so with a comprehensive understanding of both their ancestral heritage and the external threats that exist in the globalized world. This synthesis has created a unique, highly effective form of community-level vigilance that acts as the primary, immediate layer of defense for the territory. It is a model of social organization that is deeply, authentically Samoan, yet perfectly calibrated to navigate the dangers of the modern landscape. The broader international community, often oblivious to the vulnerabilities of small, remote island nations, can learn much from the resilience displayed by the people of American Samoa. Their experience underscores a critical, universal truth, that transnational organized crime is not a force of nature, but a tactical, predatory behavior that relies entirely on the successful exploitation of societal blind spots. By systematically identifying, addressing, and closing these blind spots, whether they exist in logistical systems, socioeconomic gaps, or in the silence of communal trauma, a territory can effectively neutralize the predatory advantage that these syndicates thrive upon. The story of American Samoa is a vital, documented proof that local, community-centered action is the most effective, scalable countermeasure to globalized, systemic threats. It provides a blueprint for resilience that emphasizes the necessity of institutional reform, social inclusion, and the uncompromising defense of the community's right to its own future. As we conclude this long examination of the crisis, it is important to center the focus once more on the individuals who gave their lives in the service of their families and their home. Their sacrifice was not merely a tragic outcome of a failed system, it was the catalyst for the birth of a more secure, aware, and unified society. Their absence is felt in every facet of the island's life, a constant, solemn reminder of the fragility of peace. Yet, their memory is also the driving force behind the territory's current prosperity and its persistent, unwavering commitment to the safety of its youth. Every measure taken to protect the port, every program designed to empower the vulnerable, and every instance of communal collaboration is a silent, ongoing act of remembrance for those who were lost. They are the permanent, guiding spirits of the territory's post-crisis era, their legacies etched into the very foundations of the society that has chosen, in the face of absolute darkness, to build a future defined by the light of its own determination. The tranquility that now characterizes the island is an achievement of profound, collective effort, a reality that is constantly reinforced by the day-to-day choices of every citizen. There is an unspoken, shared understanding that the peace they possess is not a passive gift, but an earned, maintained, and highly valued state of being. The way the community interacts with its environment, the way it approaches its economic goals, and the way it protects its communal values all reflect this deep, enduring clarity of purpose. American Samoa stands today as a place where the lessons of the most brutal of histories have been successfully translated into the foundational principles of a hopeful, secure future. It is a place that has survived the absolute worst of what a globalized world can offer and has emerged with its soul, its culture, and its communal integrity not only intact but fundamentally enriched by the struggle. Looking forward, the territory's journey is far from complete. It is an ongoing, evolving narrative that will continue to be shaped by the challenges of the future. But the people of Pago Pago now possess the wisdom, the institutional capacity, and the social unity required to face whatever might come next with a calm, deliberate resolve. They are no longer the unwitting subjects of external forces. They are the intentional, active architects of their own destiny. The Pacific Ocean, which for years mirrored the depth of their suffering, now reflects the enduring vastness of their resilience. As the waves continue to break against the shores of their home, they carry the echoes of the past, but they also bring the promise of a future that is entirely their own to define, to guard, and to flourish within. The territory of American Samoa has reclaimed its peace, and in doing so, it has demonstrated to the entire world that when a people stand united against the darkness, they possess a power that is truly insurmountable. They walk now into the light of their own choosing, a resilient, unified, and deeply wise people, forever anchored by the memory of their struggle and propelled forward by the unwavering, collective conviction that their home will remain a sanctuary, protected, cherished, and free for all the generations that are yet to come. The concluding reflections on the harrowing odyssey of American Samoa between 2018 and 2020 reveal not just the anatomy of a localized catastrophe, but the blueprint of a profound societal evolution. To understand the current reality of the territory is to acknowledge that the peace existing today is not a restoration of the past, but the construction of an entirely new paradigm. The silence that once haunted the villages of Pago Pago has been replaced by a deliberate, active, and vocal commitment to collective vigilance. This shift signifies that the island has moved beyond the reactive stages of trauma recovery and has settled into a state of permanent, institutionalized resilience. The lessons extracted from the dark era are now the bedrock of the island's governing philosophy, serving as a constant reminder that the most significant threats to communal integrity are often those that operate with the greatest subtlety and the most deceptive familiarity. The residents of the islands have learned to identify the indicators of systemic infiltration with an almost intuitive precision, ensuring that the vulnerabilities which previously invited such chaos are now continuously monitored, hardened, and defended against. The internal structure of the territory has been fundamentally re-engineered to prevent the compartmentalization of information that once allowed the criminal syndicates to operate with such lethal impunity. Where there was once a disconnect between the various layers of the community, between the traditional elders, the commercial actors, and the federal law enforcement, there is now a sophisticated, integrated network of communication and cooperation. This is not a formalization of suspicion, but a necessary development of communal security, where the health of the whole is recognized as being dependent upon the vigilance of the individual parts. Every sector of society, from the harbor workers and the small business owners to the church leaders and the youth advocates, now plays a proactive role in maintaining the security of the collective. This collaborative model has effectively dismantled the conditions that once permitted an invisible enemy to thrive in the shadows of the island's isolation. By creating a society that is transparent to itself, the territory has made it impossible for external predators to hide their activities behind the facade of ordinary daily life. The memory of the disappeared youth remains the emotional anchor of this new society, serving as the primary deterrent against the return of complacency. Their names, while perhaps spoken with less frequency as time moves forward, are etched into the foundations of the youth development programs and the community outreach initiatives that have become central to the island's mission. The tragedy of their lost lives is not used to foster a culture of fear, but rather to inspire a culture of responsibility. Every time a young person on the island is mentored, supported, or provided with a genuine, meaningful opportunity, it is done as a silent, ongoing acknowledgement of the lives that were so abruptly interrupted. This intentional practice of memory acts as a powerful, unifying force, reminding the entire population of the true, incalculable cost of the darkness they once faced. It serves to reinforce the collective conviction that the safety and well-being of the next generation is the only metric of success that truly matters for the future of the archipelago. As the territory continues to navigate the complexities of the modern global landscape, it does so with a clarity of purpose that is the direct result of having survived the unthinkable. The reliance on the broader United States federal apparatus is now characterized by a sophisticated, mutual understanding that respects the unique cultural identity of the Samoan people while upholding the necessary, rigorous standards of national and regional security. This is not a one-way dependency. It is a partnership that recognizes the local population as the primary, most effective guardian of their own borders. The federal government's support, be it in the form of technological investment, judicial resources, or administrative guidance, is now seamlessly integrated into a strategy that is locally led and locally sustained. This transition from passive oversight to active, empowered partnership has resulted in a territory that is more capable, more confident, and more secure than it has ever been in its modern history. The cultural narrative of the island has also undergone a subtle, profound shift, moving away from the simplistic, romanticized imagery of the South Pacific and toward a more nuanced, realistic portrayal of a community that has proven its capacity for intense, complex resilience. This narrative is reflected in the way the territory engages with the world, in the way it manages its economic development, and in the way it protects its heritage. There is a quiet, steely pride in the Samoan identity that now incorporates the knowledge of what the people are capable of enduring and, more importantly, what they are capable of overcoming. This identity is not defined by the trauma of the past, but by the resolve shown in its aftermath. It is an identity that acknowledges the vulnerability of their geographical position while asserting their refusal to be defined by that vulnerability. The residents of Pago Pago move through their daily lives with an understanding that their home is a place that must be earned, defended, and cherished by everyone who dwells within its borders. The international implications of this story are vast, particularly for other small, remote, and strategically important territories that face the relentless, probing reach of globalized crime. American Samoa has demonstrated that the most effective counter-narrative to the infiltration of criminal syndicates is the cultivation of a deeply informed, highly active, and fundamentally unified community. The technical tools of security, the scanners, the databases, and the surveillance are, in the final analysis, merely the instruments of a much more potent, underlying force, the collective will of a people to remain free from external control. When this will is coupled with the necessary, systemic institutional reforms, it creates a defense that is not just effective, but entirely durable. The territory's survival is not an accident of geography or a triumph of technology. It is the outcome of a deliberate, sustained, and unwavering societal choice to prioritize the communal good above all other considerations. Looking forward, the long-term sustainability of this success depends on the territory's ability to remain adaptable in an ever-shifting global environment. The threats to the island's security will continue to evolve, appearing in new guises and employing new, unforeseen tactics. However, the residents of American Samoa are now better prepared than they have ever been to meet these challenges. They possess the institutional memory, the societal unity, and the structural vigilance necessary to recognize and counter threats before they can gain a foothold. The peace that they now hold is the peace of a people who know exactly how easily it can be taken away, and who have decided, with an absolute and universal consensus, that they will not permit that to happen again. The struggle of the dark years, with all its sorrow and all its lessons, has left the island with a legacy that is essentially a map for survival, a map that is clearly understood by every citizen and is now the primary guide for the future of their home. The Pacific Ocean, which for generations was the source of the island's isolation, its mystery, and its provision, remains the defining backdrop of the Samoan experience. But for those who lived through the trauma of the cartel years, the sea is also a reminder of the vast, indifferent power that they were forced to confront. The residents of Pago Pago have learned that the ocean is not a barrier to the problems of the outside world, but a channel through which the complexity of the global system reaches their shores. They have learned that they cannot control the currents of the world, but they can, and they must, control how those currents are navigated within their own waters. They have established a set of rules, a code of conduct, and a series of defenses that ensure their home remains theirs, protected from the predatory forces that would seek to treat their islands as a mere transit point for their own destructive ends. In the final assessment, the story of American Samoa during these years is the story of a transformation that reached into the very heart of the territory and emerged as something stronger, more deliberate, and more profoundly unified. It is a story that proves the strength of the human spirit when it is anchored in the shared, unquestionable commitment to the protection of one's own people. The island stands today as a place that is both a guardian of its ancient, cherished past and an active, conscious architect of a secure, enlightened future. The memory of the lost youth is not a shadow that obscures the island's progress, but a beacon that illuminates the path toward a future that is safer, more transparent, and more deeply connected in its communal resolve. They move forward with a full understanding of the world's complexities, an unwavering commitment to the safety of their youth, and a profound, collective pride in having emerged from the dark years of the drug trade with their spirit, their culture, and their identity fundamentally intact. The future of American Samoa is a future that they have meticulously built, wave by wave, through the steady, unwavering work of their own hands, ensuring that their home remains a sanctuary that is as enduring, as beautiful, and as resilient as the spirit of the people who call these islands their own for all the generations that are yet to come.